Peace and blessings to the family. Welcome back to Muhammad Speaks newspaper. I am going to do a reading today. I am your brother, Afro-Descendant Ali. Please make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a reading of Dr. Wesley Muhammad's well-researched and documented paper called The Executive Action: The White House, the CIA, and the Murder of Malcolm X. This paper was written in 2023. Shout out and to salute to Dr. Wesley Muhammad for giving permission to do this reading. Assalamu alaikum and salute to the soldier. So the paper begins. We have now looked over 50,000 Freedom of Information Act files from the FBI and the CIA. They do show, prior to Malcolm X's death, that the CIA and the State Department were actively monitoring his travels abroad and telling foreign leaders to be wary of him. This is a quote from Dan Rather, The Real Malcolm X, an intimate portrait of the man, CBS documentary 1992. Another quote to begin the paper. While the CIA and State Department have been reticent to release many documents from their files on Malcolm X, those released thus far reveal an urgent counterintelligence campaign to neutralize Malcolm X after several African and Arab countries offered him financial support in 1964 and vowed to support his petition to the United Nations, in which he accused the United States government of violating the human rights of African Americans. This quote from Carl Evans, The Hidden Hand, The Assassination of Malcolm X, Kennedy and King, March 11th, 2019. The phrase neutralize means to kill. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, ABC TV, October 18th, 1984. All four of the assassinations, JFK, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Senator Robert Kennedy, are linked together, all funded and executed by the CIA to silence the four most vocal leaders who were opposed to the agency's pro-war, pro-drug policy. John Kerner, Why the CIA Killed JFK and Malcolm X. The Secret Drug Trade in Laos, 2004. I found no evidence of CIA involvement in Malcolm X's assassination. Zach Kondo, on Riot Starters TV, February 24th, 2022. So we will scroll past the chapters. The first chapter being a mere slideshow. And it starts with a quote from Esquire magazine. Muslim gunmen pulled, I assume this is a continuation from Zach Kondo's quote. Muslim gunmen pulled the trigger, but the available record, including government documents, strongly suggests that Malcolm X was the victim of a government-inspired political assassination. So this is from the actual Esquire magazine. Shayla Dewan makes the disappointing but true observation that the death of Malcolm X never inflamed the public imagination in the same way the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did. Of the political assassinations of the 1960s, that of Malcolm X is treated as an outlier, dismissed as simple black-on-black crime, or the fruit of black Muslim fratricide. Nothing more, nothing less. Peter Isaacson wrote, for example, Americans remember four spectacular symbolic assassinations from the 1960s. That of President John F. Kennedy, shot in Dallas, Texas on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, marks a moment of maximum trauma in modern U.S. history. For 3 days, television channels ran with no advertising as the nation witnessed not just the sudden disappearance of a youthful president, but the unfolding of a complex narrative of criminality that concluded with the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, Kennedy's presumed killer, 2 days later. The second high-profile assassination of the radical black political activist Malcolm X in 1965 played out as a mere slideshow. The national media treated it essentially as a black-on-black killing or a settling of scores among marginal political extremists. Excuse me. The third assassination, the gunning down of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1968, shocked the nation already rattled by the JFK assassination and the Vietnam War. King was a black leader considered far more respectable than Malcolm X. The black community reacted with violence as riots broke out in several U.S. cities. The fourth assassination occurred 2 months later, when JFK's brother, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, was fatally wounded by a Palestinian immigrant, Sirhan Bishara Sirhan, following his victory in the California primary. Most people expected him to win this year's November presidential election. His death induced a shock sense of utter dismay across the nation. And that's the end of that quote. This notion of the assassination of Malcolm X as a mere slideshow of the 1960s assassination drama is common. It is also wrong. Closer scrutiny of the events leading up to Malcolm X's murder strongly supports that it was orchestrated by the U.S. intelligence apparatus. The same apparatus behind the murders of Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba of the Congo, the U.S. President John F. Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, all committed between 1960 and 1968. One reason the assassination of Malcolm X has not been adequately elucidated in and by current scholarly treatments is this: not enough attention has been given to America's Assassination Bureau, the apparatus that conducts the domestic and international government-sanctioned political murders, and its modus operandi. This writing will redress this scholarly oversight. The many largely unrecognized, intimate interconnections between the assassination of Malcolm X on the one hand and the political assassinations of the 1960s on the other hand prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the tragic and traumatic event that occurred in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965 was not the bitter fruit of a black extremist gang war or an example of black Muslim fratricide. Rather, the murder of Malcolm X was a bona fide government hit, a Cold War political assassination, not unlike that of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy or the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., thus proving Malcolm X's final thoughts on the matter to be accurate. Quote, "I was concentrating on Chicago. It's not coming from Chicago, it's coming from Washington." 2. America's Murder Inc. Since the close of World War II, the United States has had in place an assassination apparatus. William Blum has outlined this decapitation squad operated by the CIA, the purpose of which was and is killing heads of state and others. This decapitation squad was referred to by former President Lyndon Baines Johnson as a damned murder inc. And he implied it was involved in killing his predecessor, President John F. Kennedy. A declassified 1953 CIA file entitled A Study of Assassination is a 19-page training manual or how-to guide in the art of political killing. It outlines techniques to efficiently carry out such decapitations and offers detailed descriptions of the procedures, instruments, and implementation of assassination. Killing a political leader whose burgeoning career is a clear and present danger to the cause of freedom may be held necessary. Persons who are morally squeamish should not attempt. The document admonishes. The targets of these decapitation operations are those persons who threaten the United States' freedom to pursue her capitalist and colonial ambitions in third world nations. This manual, used during Operation P.B. Success, which involved the overthrow of the democratically elected Guatemalan government of President Jacobo Arbenz in 1954 and the installation of the military dictatorship of Carlos Castillo Armas. A study of assassination was distributed to CIA agents and operatives during PB Success. Retired Air Force Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who was Chief of Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Kennedy years and provided support for clandestine CIA operations from 1955 to 1964, and who is behind the character Mr. X in Oliver Stone's 1991 hit movie JFK, tells us that the uncounted times enemies of the government had been killed by this murder inc. quickly, cleanly, and with precision, and without their apprehension and prosecution by anyone. This government-sponsored murder capability was a professional operation. This murder capability of the United States was codified in 1960 as ZR/Rifle, the code name for a documented systematic CIA assassination program. ZR/Rifle was a project to research and develop the means for overthrowing foreign political leaders, including a standing capability to perform assassination when required. This standing assassination capability, euphemized by the CIA as an executive action, was requested by the White House. The CIA has correctly been described as the secret hand of the White House. The project, ZR/Rifle, aimed at the assassination of political leaders whose further existence impinged on U.S. interests. Bill Harvey, known as CIA's loaded gun ran the project. Police say, pardon me, this is an article. Police say they have photos of Malcolm's 5 assassins. This is a screenshot taken from the Morning Call of Paterson, New Jersey, February 25th, 1965. In 1960, a White House special group formed a working group within the CIA called Operation 40 that focused on Cuba. Initially, the task of Operation 40 operatives was the training of persons to infiltrate Cuba and to make contact with people in the political sector of the government. But there was also an assassination section that consisted of a team of professional hitmen trained in political assassinations and who were contracted by the CIA. Operation 40 became an ultra-secret CIA hit squad. A signature of Operation 40 was the training and use of 5-man commando teams. Each team consisted of a leader and 4 men specializing in communications, clandestine operations, psychological warfare, and explosives. The 5-man kill team seems to have been a standard operating procedure of a government hit. On the north shore of New Orleans' Lake Pontchartrain, the CIA conducted an anti-Castro guerrilla training camp where David Ferrie drilled 5-man commando teams preparing to infiltrate Cuba and assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison believed that the exiles' training to assassinate Castro had been spun off into the hit on President Kennedy. The 15 to 20 men who were in Dealey Plaza to kill the president were probably divided into groups of 5. For example, the Texas School Depository team seems to have consisted of Malcolm Wallace, site manager, Loy Factor, decoy shooter, Oswald Doppelganger, decoy shooter, Ruth Ann Martinez, spotter, and Oswald himself, Patsy. Likewise, the hit on Senator Robert Kennedy on June 6, 1968 was a much larger operation than what the general public has been led to believe. A one-man, Sirhan show. Indeed, the infamous 5 commando team has been discerned in the RFK operation. At least 5 people, 4 men and a woman, carried out the conspiracy to kill Robert Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel. In the Malcolm X operation, we have identified 2 kill teams, and both of them consisted of 5 members each. Kill Team 1 was the Judas team, led by James 67X Shabazz, and apparently consisted of James, Earl Grant, Reuben Francis, Langston Savage, and John 57X Gray. This was the inside clique that set Malcolm X up to be successfully gunned down by Kill Team 2, the shooter team. Kill Team 2 consisted of William 25X Bradley, Benjamin 3X Thomas, Leon 3X Davis, Wilbur Kinley, and Thomas X Heyer. Operational plausible deniability and the false flag. Operational plausible deniability is an essential element of an executive action, the original and principal purpose of the doctrine of plausible deniability is non-attribution to the United States of a covert operation. National Security Council Directive 5412, March 15, 1954, defines covert operations as all activities conducted pursuant to this directive that are so planned and executed that any U.S. government responsibility for them is not evident to unauthorized persons, and that, if uncovered, the U.S. can plausibly disclaim any responsibility for them. Thus, the doctrine of plausible deniability was designed to protect the U.S. and its operatives from the consequences of disclosure of the covert operation and to mask decisions of the president and his senior staff. In January in a January 25, 1962 document, Bill Harvey issued instructions regarding ZR/rifle protocol aimed at ensuring non-attributability of these political murders to the United States. The protocols included never mention the word assassination and design operations in a way in which the Soviets could be blamed. A key tactic in ensuring operational plausible deniability is therefore to use the false flag operation. The false flag is an act committed with the intent of disguising the actual source of responsibility and pinning blame on another party through a deliberate misrepresentation of the operative's affiliation. The false flag is a key element in the cover-up of a crime. It forges trails that lead to a design patsy and a false sponsor. The latter is a term used in covert intelligence actions, which describes the individual or organization to be publicly blamed after the action, thus diverting attention away from the true sponsor, i.e. the intelligence community and/or the United States government. The false flag deception was built into the Executive Action Program. The CIA's domestic shooter team. The 1947 legislation setting up the CIA bars the agency from any security or police function inside the United States, leaving all such activity to the FBI. Nevertheless, there evolved a special unit within the CIA's super-secret counterintelligence branch that illegally focused on domestic operations. The Domestic Operations Division, DoD, as it was named, was under the authority of the infamous counterintelligence chief James Angleton. The very title, Domestic Operations, amounted to a violation of the CIA's original charter. According to CIA master spy and infamous Watergate burglar E. Howard Hunt, the DoD was established in 1962, shortly after the failure of the Bay of Pigs operation in late 1961. Many agency men connected with that failure were shunted into the new domestic unit, according to Hunt. These were mainly Cuban exiles. Tracy Barnes was made chief of DoD, and Hunt himself served as the chief of covert action for the DoD, 1962 to 1966. Regarding the DoD, its purpose was for clandestine operational activities of the clandestine services conducted within the United States against foreign targets. DoD was a division of the CIA, but was not housed at Langley. Rather, it was housed at 1750 Pennsylvania Avenue, only a block away from the White House. The espionage techniques that counterintelligence chief James Angleton mastered were mass surveillance, disinformation, extrajudicial detention, and targeted assassination. The same techniques that he used against foreigners, he also employed against domestic targets. He assembled domestic intelligence dossiers on Americans, recruited plants and informants to infiltrate the more militant groups, produced double agents, and assassinated targets. Angleton set up within his department a kidnapping and assassination operation headed by Boris Pash, a military intelligence officer. E. Howard Hunt confirmed that, since as early as the mid-1950s, Angleton and the CIA ran a small domestic assassination unit. According to Don Denislia, a CIA officer in Angleton's counterintelligence clandestine services, Barnes coordinated CIA-ordered assassinations on behalf of Richard Helms and Allen Dulles. And here's an org chart of the DoD. In 1974, the New York Times exposed that the CIA had been conducting a massive illegal domestic intelligence operation in the United States against the anti-war movement, black militants, and other dissident groups in direct violation of its charter. The pretense of this highly coordinated domestic spying was the search for evidence of foreign involvement in the anti-war movement. The White House asked the CIA to determine whether foreign governments were supplying undercover agents and funds to anti-war radicals and black militants and groups in the United States. CIA agents followed and photographed dissidents and set up a network of informants to infiltrate targeted groups. There was a close relationship between Angleton's illegal DoD operations and J. Edgar Hoover's illegal COINTELPRO. While COINTELPRO was launched in 1956, it was turbocharged in 1958 by the CIA's Angleton. The latter's own domestic surveillance operation fed the COINTELPRO beast. Angleton's domestic surveillance program funneled secret reporting on law-abiding citizens to Hoover's COINTELPRO operatives for 18 years. The FBI used CIA information to harass leftists, liberals, and civil rights leaders from 1956 to 1974. Angleton was the ghost of COINTELPRO. The FBI secured the assistance of the CIA in investigating anti-war activists and black militant leaders who traveled overseas. The DoD had offices in more than a dozen cities across the nation. The New York office goes back at least to 1964. New York was a prime CIA domestic spying target because that city was considered a big training ground for radical activities in the United States. The New York office seems to have focused on black militants. The DoD's operational objectives were 1. Infiltrate its agents into targeted groups, 2. Turn somebody around, i.e. turn a group member into an informer, and 3. Neutralize the target group or person. The CIA recruited African American spies as part of its domestic operation to surveil black militants in America and in Africa. A special office for the Black program was set up in the basement of CIA headquarters in McLean, Virginia. Details of this Black Op or program of black spying was considered among the agency's most sensitive and closely held information. The purported aim was to determine whether black extremists were being financed and directed by communist groups. This domestic operation that was aimed at black militants in the U.S. in the early 1960s would later be consolidated with other domestic intelligence operations by CIA Director Richard Helms in 1967, and subsumed under the titles Operation Chaos Domestic and MH Chaos International. Chaos was the CIA's response to White House pressure for intelligence about foreign influence upon American descent. Through the operation, the CIA extensively disseminated raw reports to the FBI. Chaos was coordinated through Angleton's counterintelligence staff and concentrated on foreign links, funding, and guerrilla training to the peace and black movements, including the Nation of Islam. A.J. Weberman makes an important observation. MH Chaos was worldwide. That is what the MH means. Chaos was confined to the USA. MH Chaos targeted those who opposed the war in Vietnam when they were overseas. Chaos was a program of domestic assassinations. 3. Military intelligence and the targeting of Black America. From the time of the First World War, top U.S. Army intelligence officers were convinced that Black America was ripe for subversion. First by agents of the German Kaiser, then by communists, later by the Japanese, and eventually by those opposed to the Vietnam War. For example, Major R.M. Howell, Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence at Fort McPherson in Atlanta, told the War Department in a December 5, 1932 intelligence report, "Communism has chosen the Southern Negro as the American group most likely to respond to its revolutionary appeal." The real fear of these military officers was revolution and guerrilla warfare. Negro unrest was considered a domestic enemy. Military intelligence saw anarchy and treason behind the anti-war and civil rights movements. Lieutenant General William Pelham Yarborough, who commanded John F. Kennedy Center for Special Warfare, the Green Beret School at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, from 1961 to 1965, and became Army Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence in 1966, liked to quote the claim that communists have obviously decided that urban Negro ghettos hold the key to guerrilla activities that can create enough anarchy to constitute a revolution. To dig it out, Yarborough said, a jettisoning of certain civil rights must take place. From this conviction was born, in 1917, a spy network targeting Black America led by Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Van de Man of the Military Intelligence Division. He hired Joel E. Spingarn, the whiteboard chairman of the NAACP, and made him a major in MID in May 1918. Spingarn and Black agent Lieutenant T. Montgomery Gregory ran a small unit of undercover agents. Spingarn used his position as NAACP chairman to obtain critical information for MID, such as lists of the organization's 32,000 members. The NAACP gives an annual award named for Spingarn. Top secret and illegal measures were used against blacks. The main target of this military intelligence operation was the black church in the South and black ministers. By the 1960s, U-2 spy planes were used to monitor the civil rights movement. The Army intelligence operatives teamed up with the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama to spy on black leaders, and the Army provided KKK members with paramilitary training. Klansmen supplied Army intelligence operatives with information about local civil rights activists. Lieutenant General Yarborough argued for the mutual support and collaboration between his elite Special Forces commandos and Army intelligence in counterinsurgency operations, both foreign and domestic. During Yarborough's tenure as Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Army intelligence made frequent use of Green Beret troops for domestic spying. In addition, the CIA frequently used the military services, particularly the Special Forces, to carry out its assassinations. As L. Fletcher Prouty notes, it is in fact no secret that the Green Berets had long uniformed mercenaries of the CIA. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the Special Warfare School gave training to Green Berets and Delta Force in guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and assassinations. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Marvin of the United States Army Special Forces retired revealed that when he began his Green Beret training at Fort Bragg in December 1963, shortly after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, his classified training was conducted by CIA personnel, who highlighted the murder in Dealey Plaza as an illusion of a successful assassination operation involving a lone wolf patsy. Precluded from having operational forces of its own, the agency adopted the Green Berets. The CIA achieved military embodiment in the United States Special Forces establishment at Fort Bragg. According to Colonel John Downey of 902nd Military Intelligence Group (MIG), 902nd began to plan the killing of black community leaders as early as 1963 and 1964, when it seemed the cities might get out of hand. Green Beret teams were covertly dispatched to the urban areas to make street maps, identify landing zones for riot troops, and to scout sniper sites. Small Alpha Team units were covertly deployed in specialized civilian disguise in cities where violence was breaking out. They were issued with photographs, mugshots of black militants in each city. In some instances, particular individuals were designated as targets to be taken out, killed if an opportunity arose in the course of a disruption or riot. Army intelligence published the green and white mug books on black radicals containing photographs, family history, political philosophy, personal finances, and updated surveillance information in order to facilitate their identification by Army commanders and intelligence personnel, Green Berets. What started in 1917 as a military spy network targeting black ministers in the South became in the 1960s military assassination teams targeting urban black militants and leaders. Part 4. The CIA's American Jihad. Violent Muslim fanaticism in this country is a spawn of U.S. intelligence operations, and Islamist terrorist cells have been a handmaiden of the U.S. covert operations apparatus. While the CIA was training and equipping the Afghan Mujahideen, in Pakistan to fight against the Soviet Union, Operation Cyclone, 1979 to 1992. The agency was also deliberately stoking Islamic fundamentalism in America and growing jihad offices in Brooklyn, New York, and Jersey City, New Jersey. The U.S. connection to al-Qaeda was epitomized by the protection afforded to the al-Qaeda's al-Qifa recruitment and support center in the Al-Farouk Mosque in Brooklyn, New York. Both the mosque and later the center financed and trained jihadis, including Americans, for al-Qaeda operations overseas. From as early as 1979, the mosque had been a center of international Islamist activity as part of the U.S.-approved struggle against the Soviets in Afghanistan. Robert Friedman further describes the beginning of the CIA's jihad in his important article by the title in New York Magazine, to stoke up, and then this is a quote from the book, The CIA's Jihad. To stoke up financial and spiritual support for the rebel effort, the CIA sponsored visits to the centers by Afghan veterans and Islamic religious figures. The CIA needed support for its covert war against the Soviets in Afghanistan, so it stoked up Islamic fundamentalism in Brooklyn. The Al-Qifa Refugee Center, in addition to providing a hangout for the disaffected, distributed pamphlets and videotapes on the rebel war in Afghanistan. But the highlight for the center's regulars were the inspirational Jihad lecture series, featuring CIA-sponsored speakers. One week on Atlantic Avenue, it might be a CIA-trained Afghan rebel traveling on CIA-issued visa. The next, it might be a clean-cut Arab-speaking Green Beret who would lecture about the importance of being part of the Mujahideen, or Warriors of God. The more particular lectures were held upstairs in the roomier Al-Farouk Mosque, such as the case in 1990 when Sheikh Abdel Rahman, traveling on CIA-supplied visa, came to town. The blind Egyptian cleric, with his ferocious rhetoric and impassioned preachings, filled angry and discontented Arab immigrants with a fervor for jihad holy war. This was exactly what the CIA wanted: to stir up support for the Muslim rebels and topple the Soviet-backed government in Afghanistan. The CIA has inadvertently managed to do something that America's enemies have been unable to: give terrorism a foothold in the United States. I would rather use the word inadvertently here. The blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, called the father of all things al-Qaeda in America, was a protected CIA asset. In Pakistan, the Sheikh served as one of the CIA's point men in the smuggling of $3 billion in covert arms to the Mujahideen rebels fighting the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan. Beginning December 15, 1986, the blind Sheikh was given 4 visas from the CIA, even though he was on a State Department terrorism watch list should have barred him from the country. With this action, the CIA managed to give terrorism a foothold in the United States. There was no foreign Islamic terrorism in the U.S. before the CIA clandestinely moved its major chessboard piece, the blind Sheikh, into the country. The Prince of Jihad was an untouchable protected asset by the United States government. Here's a quote. As U.S. official argued that Rahman was an untouchable being protected by no fewer than three agencies. It was no accident that the sheikh got a visa and that he's still in the country, replied the agent, visibly upset. He's here under the banner of national security, the State Department, the NSA, and the CIA. The agent pointed out that the sheikh had been granted a tourist visa and later a green card, despite the fact that he was on a State Department terrorist watch list that should have barred him from the country. He's an untouchable, concluded the agent. The United States government knew everything the blind sheikh was up to during this time, as the FBI had a man close to him who had infiltrated his circle. Another government asset Muslim fanatic double agent was Ali Muhammad, who was an FBI and CIA informant as well as the chief terrorist trainer of Al-Qaeda. In 1981, Muhammad was selected for a special foreign officers program held at the Green Berets Special Forces School at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There, Muhammad got training in unconventional and guerrilla warfare, surveillance, and explosives. The same training given to Green Berets, minus the classified courses. While Muhammad never became an official Green Beret or received security clearance, he managed to work his way up to the rank of E5, sergeant, and without any security clearance, got posted to the highly secure JFK Special Warfare Center, where elite Green Beret and Delta Force officers train. While working in the highly secure Green Beret School, Muhammad often traveled to New York and New Jersey on weekends to train followers of Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, the blind sheikh, in guerrilla warfare tactics. On these weekend terrorist training trips, Sergeant Muhammad brought with him top-secret memos from the Fort Bragg Special Warfare Center, including the location of all special operation units worldwide. A treasure trove of intel that made its way to the Al-Qaeda leadership. These trips were not necessarily secret, yet Muhammad operated unmolested. The CIA FBI assets Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman and Ali Muhammad guided the evolution of Al-Qaeda in America and its jihadi terrorism. They drew first blood on the United States on November 5, 1990, with the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, the racist founder of the Jewish Defense League. The five-man jihadi cell from New Jersey that carried out the hit were devoted followers of the blind sheikh and got weapons training from Ali Muhammad. In the five-man commando team, at least three were assets protected by the United States government. 25 years before this CIA FBI-sponsored and protected five-man commando team of Muslim terrorists from New Jersey carried out a jihad assassination of Meir Kahane in New York, another CIA FBI-sponsored and protected five-man commando team of terrorists from New Jersey carried out a jihad assassination of Malcolm X in New York. The first fanatical Muslim terrorist cell that was connected to the United States covert operations apparatus was the five-man shooter team from New Jersey that gunned down Malcolm X in 1965. Part 5. U.S. intelligence apparatus targets Malcolm X. After Malcolm X's split from the Nation of Islam in March 1964, the CIA and FBI worked closely together in investigating and surveilling him. At times, CIA and FBI agents exchanged information daily. S.J. Papich was the FBI liaison to the CIA's Director of Plans, Richard Helms. The CIA memos were sent to the FBI via pappage. In addition, the same military intelligence machinery that was deployed against JFK and MLK was also operational in the Malcolm X hit. Bear with me. That's okay. At the time of Malcolm X's death, he was already being closely monitored on a near hour-to-hour basis by the FBI director, the CIA director, the CIA's deputy director of plans, and the director of naval intelligence, the chief of the Air Force Counterintelligence Division, and the Army's assistant chief of staff for intelligence. This was essentially the entire intelligence apparatus of the federal government. When Malcolm arrived in Detroit in January 1965, agents from the Army's G2 Intelligence Corps were secretly there to monitor him. In certain COINTELPRO operations targeting the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X's Muslim Mosque, Inc., the FBI sent instant communications to select agencies including Assistant Attorney General J. Walter Yeagley, U.S. Secret Service Chief, the Director of Naval Intelligence, the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence, Department of the Army, the Air Force Chief of Counterintelligence Division. As we saw above, Angleton ran the illegal and thus super-secret Domestic Operations Division, which housed a kidnapping and assassination unit. These domestic assassinations were coordinated by Tracy Barnes, Chief of DoD, the same covert action hierarchy that was responsible for domestic assassinations when President Kennedy was publicly executed in 1963 was still in place when Malcolm X was publicly executed in 1965. Director of Central Intelligence John McCone, Director of Counterintelligence James Angleton, Deputy Director of Plans Richard Helms, Chief of Domestic Operations Division Tracy Barnes, Chief of the Covert Activities Section of DoD E. Howard Hunt. The government's kill list. The evidence is strong that the assassination apparatus, America's Murder, Inc., that killed the President of the United States was also unsheathed the deadly Gurkha scimitar against Malcolm X. The assassinations of the 1960s proceeded from a U.S. government kill list that was in place by 1963. Loran Hall was a leader of an anti-Castro guerrilla group who says he was offered a $50,000 contract on October 17, 1963 in Dallas to kill President Kennedy. Hall told District Attorney Jim Garrison that the right-wing radicals and the CIA put together a kill list at meetings attended by CIA agents. Plans were made to kill President Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, and other national figures. We know that among those other national figures on that CIA kill list was Malcolm X. CIA operative Marita Lorenz has stated that by 1963 she was aware of the plot to kill all for men because the American generals and politicians that visited us at our CIA ran training camp all spoke about killing JFK, RFK, MLK, and Malcolm X. Malcolm frustrates America's neo-colonialist plans for Africa. Because the US planned a neo-colonial move into Africa in the wake of the exit of the colonial powers, the State Department had a vested interest in countering America's image in Africa as a racist society. Malcolm X's two trips to Africa, April 13th to May 21st, 1964, and July 9th to November 24th, 1964, and his discussions with many African leaders helped to undercut this effort and America's credibility. Malcolm exposed America's hypocrisy. During the first trip, Malcolm visited Egypt, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Ghana, Morocco, and Algeria. Upon his return to the United States on May 21st, Malcolm told the press that he was prepared to work with the heads of certain African nations to bring charges of human rights violations against the United States in the United Nations, effectively putting the U.S. in the same bag as apartheid South Africa and white-ruled Rhodesia. I have received pledges from African nations to support a stand against the United States before the United Nations. The United States would be compelled to face the same charges as South Africa, Portugal, and Rhodesia. The United States has colonized the Negro people just like the people of Africa and Asia were colonized by Europeans. This triggered the White House and the CIA. As far as the CIA was concerned, its main purpose was to convince Africans that the United States was not the violently racist society that communists portrayed. But by 1964, America's credibility in Africa had plummeted, and the Congo mission was a big factor, something Malcolm frequently criticized President Johnson for. To add injury to insult, Malcolm X had chosen that moment to make his two triumphant tours to Africa. Malcolm's pledge to indict the United States at the United Nations was considered so potentially damaging to American foreign policy that it was discussed with Lyndon B. Johnson. More than any other single factor, Malcolm X was responsible for the growing suspicion and fear with which many African countries viewed Washington's intentions. Washington did not accept this threat to its third world relations with equanimity. Malcolm X became a marked man. The kill team assembled. Immediately after Malcolm's May 21st remarks to the press, the CIA decided to investigate Malcolm X as a clandestine services operation. Clandestine services, also known as the Office of the Deputy Director of Plans, is the Dirty Tricks Division of the CIA that was involved in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba and the overthrow and assassination of several Asian, African, and Latin American rulers. Now, in the latter part of May 1964, clandestine services turned their scope on Malcolm X. What happens next? Carl Evans told journalist Tony Brown, Incidentally, the same week that the counterintelligence operation by the CIA began to focus on Malcolm X, that's the week that Talmadge Hayer and his gang were hired to kill Malcolm X. This is important, and it is not incidental that the Black Muslim Kill Team was recruited immediately after the CIA began its clandestine services operation against Malcolm X. This CIA move at the end of May coincided with the FBI's move at the beginning of June. On Friday, June 5, an irate J. Edgar Hoover sent a Western Union telegram to the Bureau's New York office with blunt orders. Do something about Malcolm X. Enough of this black violence in New York. Truly, it is not a coincidence that within a 2-week period, 3 critical assassination developments occurred. 1. End of May. The CIA's Assassination Department, Clandestine Services, opens a file on Malcolm X. 2. Beginning of June, the FBI's Director Hoover issues blunt orders to his New York office to do something about Malcolm X in order to end black violence there, concerning which the FBI and the CIA information implicating some of Malcolm's people. 3. Beginning of June, Talmadge Hayer and the New Jersey Kill Team were hired to kill Malcolm X. These developments shine light on a detail revealed by London's Times, which reported in June 1964, an FBI informant received information that Malcolm X is going to be bumped off. June 1964, therefore, is when the assassination of Malcolm X was originally initiated. It was a 5-man commando team, and its principal assassin, the shotgun wielder, was a U.S. intelligence asset, as we shall see, with strong parallels with Al-Qaeda's Ali Muhammad. During the first 2 weeks of June, Hayer and his fellow hired assassins plotted Malcolm's murder. They drove around Paterson, New Jersey, strategizing the hit. They cased Malcolm's home and saw it had stayed guarded. In June, things heated up considerably for Malcolm, with the CIA-FBI counterintelligence program covertly inflaming and manipulating his increasingly volatile situation with the Nation of Islam. Then, on July 9th, Malcolm again left the United States for his second trip to Africa, spending a total of another 18 weeks abroad. The New Jersey mercenaries were therefore sidelined. Around the time that he left the country, it seems to have been a cooling off period, if I recall correctly, Hayer said. Nothing has happened, so I thought that maybe things were going to get better, man. Malcolm's second trip put a stay on the domestic operation to neutralize him. But the assassination was not called off. It was just handled as a foreign operation. The CIA initiated a program to monitor Malcolm's foreign contacts and activities during his visit to Africa and Asia. This time, Malcolm traveled abroad as a clandestine services target. He returned to the United States November 24th, 1964, but not before he was a victim of an assassination attempt. Part 6. Executive Action. The White House orders Malcolm's death. Malcolm opened his campaign to internationalize the American Negro problem at the second meeting of 33 heads of independent African states in Cairo, which convened July 17th. When several thousand pages were released from the COINTELPRO operations against Malcolm in the early 1980s, they show that in 1964, following a complaint by White House aide Benjamin H. Reed, that Malcolm's affiliation with Third World leaders was damaging American foreign policy in Africa, the Central Intelligence Agency was asked to consider assassinating Malcolm X. Richard Helms, the CIA's deputy director of plans, told Reed that the CIA had serious qualms about killing American citizens, but would nonetheless explore the possibility of neutralizing Malcolm. The assassinations of the 1960s were sanctioned by the White House. They were all executive actions. Patrice Lumumba's termination was authorized by President Eisenhower at a National Security Council meeting on August 18, 1960, and carried out by the CIA and international allies. In the case of JFK, he was the president, but his vice president greenlighted his execution. The Memphis jurors in the 1999 Martin Luther King civil trial heard testimony that President Johnson and Vice President Hubert Humphrey leaned pretty hard on United Auto Workers President Walter Reuther to make Martin Luther King shut up by just taking him out. This executive pressure resulted in a $400,000 contract on Dr. King's life. Noel Twyman thus makes an important observation. The assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. all occurred under the reigns of J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson, and Robert Kennedy's and Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination occurred in rapid succession in 1968, when it became apparent that Robert Kennedy would likely capture the presidency, and they occurred before Johnson left office. The Malcolm X hit was an executive action as well. On July 2, 1964, J. Edgar Hoover defined Malcolm X as his newly created Organization of Afro-American Unity as a threat to U.S. national security. On July 9th, Malcolm left the United States for his second trip to Africa. Surveillance alerted the CIA to the fact that Malcolm X intended to appeal to African leaders at the Second Conference of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in Cairo, Egypt. In a July 10, 1964 CIA memorandum, an informant stated that Malcolm was transporting material dealing with the ill treatment of the Negro in the United States. He intends to make such material available to the OAU in an effort to embarrass the United States. The second OAU conference was scheduled to open July 17, 1964. On July 16th, back in New York, Police Lieutenant Thomas Gilligan shot and killed James Powell, a 15-year-old black male. Riots broke out in Harlem, lasting 6 nights. This was an election year, and President Johnson hoped to be elected in November, having initially acquired the presidency via political assassination. These Harlem uprisings threatened to derail President Johnson's election hopes in November. Johnson's political opponent, the far-right Arizona Republican Senator Barry Goldwater, successfully spun the riots as his law and order campaign, making them Johnson's political Achilles heel. And to add insult to injury, over these riots loomed the shadow of Johnson's black nemesis, Malcolm X. Malcolm was in Egypt when the Harlem riots erupted. However, his name rang out in Harlem. When civil rights leaders like Bayard Rustin pleaded for calm in the streets, The angry crowd showered them with boos and chanted Malcolm X. A calm scene was a common scene was black kids running in the streets, facing shinning orange in the fires, shouting, Malcolm, we want Malcolm. Wait till Malcolm comes. J. Edgar Hoover told the president that Malcolm X's rhetoric played a role in sparking the violence. There is evidence that while he was thousands of miles away in Africa, some of Malcolm X's followers were involved in the riots, hoping to spark the Black Revolution. Revolutionary Action Movement National Field Chairman Max Stanford later boasted, Malcolm left for Africa in July and Stanford, the Ram Field Chairman, left for Cuba at the end of July. While Malcolm was in Africa, Harlem exploded. The paramilitary in Malcolm's organization decided to join the rebellion and participated in armed self-defense actions against racist oppressive forces. Masses of our people exploded in Rochester, New York. The revolutionary Muslims, Malcolmites, engaged in armed struggle against the repressive forces there. Brooklyn Core held a demonstration to protest police brutality. The demonstration precipitated a mass rebellion. The Brooklyn Ram cadre went into revolutionary action. On the morning of Thursday, July 23rd, a dozen detectives from New York's 28th Precinct raided Malcolm X's unoccupied office at the Teresa Hotel. They found a loaded but licensed bolt-action Mauser rifle and over 100 rounds of ammunition. The police claimed they were acting on an anonymous tip to a newspaper. Coming the day after the riots ceased, this police action. Coming the day after the Harlem riots ceased, this police action seems to indicate an immediate linkage to Malcolm X, warranted or not. And according to the CIA memo, the Department of State considered the matter one of sufficient importance and discussed with President Johnson, who in turn asked for Mr. J. Edgar Hoover to secure any further information which he might be able to develop. The words secure information here is a CIA FBI euphemism for engage in a covert action to neutralize, i.e., conduct an executive action, assassination. A White House tape of the referenced phone conversation between the president and his FBI director reveals this. On July 21st, 1964, from the Oval Office, President Johnson spoke to J. Edgar Hoover on the phone and suggested to the director a solution to the problem that had come to Harlem, i.e. the riots. President Johnson said, maybe you, Hoover, can put a quietus on the Muslim X and all that stuff. I think the communists are in charge of it. Michael Besloch, who edited these tapes, tells us that by Muslim X, LBJ means Malcolm X. As usual, he twists the name of someone he doesn't like. Quietus is defined as a final settlement or as a debt or removal from activity, anything that kills. Quietus is short for medieval quietus, established literally, he is quiet. It is a euphemism for death. The idiom put the quietus on means to silence or terminate, as in the termination of life. President Johnson thus is here encouraging his FBI director to silence, i.e. terminate Malcolm X. As Christopher Hayes observes, men like Johnson and Hoover saw Malcolm X and his followers as threats that must be obstructed and suppressed at every turn. Recommending that Hoover silence anyone is a frightening prospect and not something to be taken lightly. As James Farmer said, but for different reasons, Malcolm was fortunate to be out of the country when this was happening. But being in Africa at the time did not put Malcolm X out of President Johnson's reach. It only put him out of Hoover's direct reach. But the operation to neutralize Malcolm X was a joint FBI-CIA effort. And in Africa, Malcolm X was fully in CIA and Mossad territory. An important CIA memorandum dated August 11, 1964, gives us critical information regarding the developments that occurred in July. The memo was sent to the Deputy Director of Plans, Richard Helms, and is titled Activities of Malcolm X, Possible Involvement of African Nations in U.S. Civil Disturbances. The Harlem Riots are the context of this memo. The first thing we learn is that in July, White House official Ben Reed, assistant to the Secretary of State Dean Rusk, telephoned Richard Helms with a request for information from clandestine services, the Dirty Tricks Department, regarding Malcolm X. We now know that a request for information is intelligence code for a request for assassination. Carl Evans's interpretation of this document seems correct. The Secretary of State's assistant, Ben Reed, contacted the CIA's Dirty Tricks Division and asked Richard Helms to consider killing Malcolm X. This memo reveals that President Johnson's Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, got rather significant indications that during the Harlem Riots, extremist Negro groups received funding from certain UN missions, specifically the United Arab Republic, Ghana, Cameroon, Algeria, and Nigeria. It was presumed that Malcolm and his own black Muslims were involved. Malcolm was, of course, in the United Arab Republic, Egypt at the time. The Department of State considered the matter one of sufficient importance to discuss with President Johnson, the memo says. The memo reveals that the Near East and Africa Division, NEA, of the Directorate of Plans secured a copy of Malcolm's address before the OAU meeting in Cairo. They also secured a facsimile of Malcolm's handwritten note to an apparent CIA asset, likely posing as a journalist who Malcolm, for one reason or another, was inclined to regard somewhat in the category of a friendly publicity agent. A remarkable statement is then recorded in this document. White House official Benjamin Reed would much appreciate any information which we may be able to secure regarding the travels of Malcolm X and what political or financial support he may be picking up along the way. I remarked to Reed that there were certain inhibitions concerning our activities with respect to the citizens of the United States, but promised to bring the matter to your attention and to advise him further. According to Evans's interpretation of this document, Ben Reed here asked Richard Helms to consider killing Malcolm X, and Helms told Reed that the CIA had serious qualms about killing American citizens, but would nonetheless explore the possibility of neutralizing Malcolm. Reed was reminded by Helms that there are certain inhibitions concerning our activities with respect to citizens of the United States, but the Secretary of State's assistant insisted that the Clandestine Services Act, responding, Malcolm X has, for all practical purposes, renounced his U.S. citizenship. As we recall, the purpose of the CIA's Domestic Operation Division was for clandestine operational activities for the clandestine services conducted within the United States against foreign targets. By declaring that Malcolm X has for all practical purposes renounced his U.S. citizenship, the White House is defining Malcolm X as a foreign target. This was authorization from the White House for the CIA to act on Malcolm X. Reed advised the CIA's Dirty Tricks Division to treat Malcolm as they would any foreign agent or enemy of the United States. Part 7. The Poisoning in Egypt. Malcolm X's pending speech before the OAU conference on July 24, 1964, concerned the U.S. government. The American embassy in Cairo engaged in delicate behind-the-scenes negotiations to have Malcolm barred from addressing the conference, but its efforts were coldly snubbed by both the Egyptian government and the conference organizers. Washington's efforts to silence Malcolm then appeared to have passed from the diplomatic to the intelligence apparatus. Their efforts came closer to success. Malcolm almost did not live to deliver his speech. On July 21st, the President of the United States and his staff communicated to his FBI and his CIA his desire that Malcolm be silenced. On July 23rd, the day after the Harlem riots and the day before Malcolm was to present his reputedly anti-American petition to the OAU conference, he and lawyer friend Milton Henry dined at the Nile Hilton restaurant in Cairo, Egypt. Malcolm describes what happens. I was having dinner at the Nile Hilton with a friend named Milton Henry and a group of others when two things happened simultaneously. I felt a pain in my stomach, and in a flash, I realized that I'd seen the waiter who served me before. He looked South American, and I'd seen him in New York. The poison bit into me like teeth. It was strong stuff. They rushed me to the hospital just in time to pump the stuff out of my stomach. The doctor told Milton that there was a toxic substance in my food. When the Egyptians who were with me looked for the waiter who had served me, he had vanished. I know that our Muslims don't have the resources to finance a worldwide spy network. Milton Henry told journalist Eric Norton Malcolm would have died if he hadn't been able to get to the hospital in a hurry. His stomach was pumped out, cleaned out thoroughly, and that saved him. But as Malcolm said afterwards, he would have died if he had not gotten immediate treatment. According to Henry, Malcolm believed someone had deliberately poisoned me. The South American-looking waiter that served him and vanished, and whom Malcolm had previously seen in New York, might well have been one of the CIA's Cuban assets. Evans is correct. This episode was reminiscent of the CIA's plots to poison Zhou Enlai at the 1955 Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung, and plots to poison Fidel Castro and Patrice Lumumba in 1960. According to what Ella Collins said to Norton, Malcolm told her the CIA was definitely responsible for it, i.e., the poisoning. Malcolm was his Malcolm was hospitalized for a day and a half. Against his doctor's advice, he managed to appear at the summit conference and gave his speech. In discussing the incident with Henry, Malcolm stressed the fact that the CIA men were all around him in Cairo. Thanks to New York journalist and author Herb Boyd, we now know the identity of at least one of these men who were around Malcolm X in Egypt and other parts of Africa. Boyd has identified the black CIA agent who shadowed Malcolm X throughout his 1964 trips through Africa and the Middle East. This agent, posing as a journalist, spent many hours in Malcolm's company and overshadowed Malcolm in 5 different countries during his travels abroad, including Egypt, Kenya, and the Sudan. His went by the name of Leo Milas, but his real name is Leo Clinton Aldridge. At the center of our speculation about Malcolm and the CIA, as his travel diary in 1964 and numerous occasions in which he met or encountered Leo Milas, who we deemed as either CIA operative, agent, or informant. Leo Milas' name first appeared in Malcolm's entry of July 26, 1964, during his second tour that year. By this time, Malcolm had been in Cairo for more than 2 weeks and was staying at the Semiramis Hotel. On this occasion, Milas may have been among reporters invited to a press conference called by Malcolm. According to his diary, Malcolm recounted the whole story about Elijah Muhammad, presumably disclosing his accusations about the children of out of wedlock. Presumably disclosing his accusations about the children of out of wedlock with his secretaries. It was the first time a reporter had taken it for print. By then, Malcolm may have been convinced that Milas was a reporter. They were later joined by a reporter from South Africa. The second meeting with Milas, at least a second diary entry, occurred 4 days later on Thursday when Jonas Savimbi and Malcolm had a rendezvous on the ISIS boat moored on the Nile. They sat in the lounge around midnight to discuss a story in Newsweek magazine about the Harlem riots. For more than an hour, Malcolm wrote, they discussed common problems. Malcolm said, I am impressed more so by both of them than by others. It's a good guess that Savimbi, whose group, UNITA, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, was funded by the reactionary regime of South Africa and immersed in a developing civil war in Angola, may have been known to Milas and vice versa. Thus, Malcolm may have been unaware of who he was, as well as John Stockwell later pointed out in his book In Search of Enemies, published in 1984. John was CIA chief of Angola Task Force, heading up their covert operations. Savimbi was one of our allies. Before appearing around Malcolm X as a journalist, Milas reportedly infiltrated UNIDAMO, National Democratic Union of Mozambique. In 1962 to 1963, and Frelimo, Liberation Front of Mozambique, 2 African liberation groups in Mozambique. Much of what we've uncovered about him is circumstantial, but there is a good likelihood we've nailed our man, Boyd said. In 1983, government officials from Maputo, the capital city of Mozambique, declared that Milas was a CIA agent. In addition, Roy Pateman, professor emeritus of political science at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, who was a counterintelligence operative for the British Army in Kenya and the United Kingdom from 1958 to 1965, knows him as Leo Milas, the black CIA agent who also penetrated Frelimo's Central Committee during part of this liberation struggle, Boyd concludes there is a possibility that Malcolm was being spooked by both a white and black agent. A black CIA agent would make more sense because that would allow him to get close to Malcolm in the same way Gene Roberts and other boss agents infiltrated the OAAU. What appears to be conclusive is that Milas, after being booted out of Frelimo, got his next assignment shadowing Malcolm, under the cover of working as a freelance journalist. Malcolm X was indeed shadowed in Egypt by a white agent, but the likelihood is that he was an agent of an Israeli Mossad rather than the CIA. Wesley Muhammad draws proper attention to a quite revealing incident recounted by Malcolm X in his autobiography. Throughout my trip, I was of course aware that I was under surveillance. The agent was a particularly obvious and obnoxious one. I am not sure for what agency, as he never identified it, or I would say it. Anyway, this one finally got under my skin when I found I couldn't seem to eat a meal in a hotel without seeing him somewhere around watching me. You would have thought I was John Dillinger or somebody. I just got up from my breakfast one morning and walked over to where he was, and I told him I knew he was following me. And if he wanted to know anything, why didn't he ask me? He started to give me one of those too lofty to descend to you attitudes. I told him then, right to his face, he was a fool, that he didn't know me, or what I stood for. So that made him one of those people who let somebody else do their thinking. And that no matter what job a man had, at least he ought to be able to think for himself. That stung him. He let me have it. I was to hear him tell it. Anti-American, un-American, seditious, subversive, and probably communist. I told him that the only thing the FBI, the CIA, or anybody else could ever find me guilty of was being open-minded. I said I was seeking for a truth. I was trying to weigh objectively everything on its own merit. I said I respected every man's right to believe whatever his intelligence tells him is intellectually sound. I expect everyone else to respect my right to believe likewise. This super sleuth then got off on my Muslim religion beliefs. I asked him, hadn't his headquarters bothered to brief him that my attitudes and beliefs were changed? I told him that the Islam I believed in now was the Islam which was taught in Mecca, that there was no God but Allah, and Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who lived in the holy city Mecca 1400 years ago, was the last messenger of Allah. Almost from the first, I had been guessing about something, and I took a chance, and I really shook up that super sleuth. From the consistent subjectivity in just about everything he asked and said, I had to do something, and I told him, you know, I think you're a Jew with anglicized name. His involuntary expression told me I hit the button. He asked me how I knew. I told him I'd had so much experience with how Jews would attack me that I usually could identify them. I told him all I held against Jews was that so many Jews actually were hypocrites in their claims to be friends of the American black man. And it burned me up to be so often called anti-Semitic. When I spoke things I knew to be the absolute truth about Jews, I told him that yes, I gave the Jew credit for being among all other whites the most active, the most vocal financier, leader, and liberal in the Negro civil rights movement, but I said at the same time I knew that the Jew played these roles for a very careful strategic reason. The more prejudice in America could be focused upon the Negro, then the more white Gentiles' prejudice would keep diverted off the Jew. I said that to me, one proof that all civil rights posturing of so many Jews was insincere was that so often the Negro in the North, the quickest segregationists were Jews themselves. Look at practically everything the black man is trying to integrate into. For instance, if Jews are not actual owners or not in controlling positions, then they are major stock holdings, or they are otherwise in powerful leverage positions, or do they really sincerely exert these influences? No. And an even clearer proof for me of how Jews truly regard Negroes, I said, this was an invariably this is I said was what invariably happened wherever a Negro moved in any white residential neighborhood that was thickly Jewish. Who would always lead the whites' exodus? The Jews. Generally in these situations some whites stay put. You just notice who they are. They're Irish Catholics, they're Italians, there are rarely ever any Jews, and ironically the Jews themselves often still have trouble being accepted. Saying this, I know I'll hear anti-Semite for every direction again. Oh yes, but truth is the truth. This is assumed to be an agent of the United States government, but this is not necessarily so. Malcolm X admitted, I'm not sure for what agency he worked, as he never identified it. We now know that the CIA shadowed Malcolm throughout Africa with a black agent, Leo Milas. The Jewish agent shadowing Malcolm in Egypt may very well have been an agent of the Israeli government, i.e. the Mossad. The American embassy in Cairo hosted Israeli agents working incognito as American citizens under diplomatic immunity. This embassy received American diplomats assigned to the American embassy in Israel. In addition, it hosted some American staff working for their embassy in Tel Aviv. Poisoning is stock in trade of Israel and American intelligence assassinations. Mossad likes to use poisons. Tom Leonard tells us the CIA could have been behind the poisoning of Malcolm X. It could also have been the Mossad, however. Quite possibly, the poisoning of Malcolm X was a CIA Mossad operation. Part 8. Malcolm bounces back, and the White House takes notice. Malcolm X survived the poisoning and delivered his speech to the OAU gathering. The White House and the CIA were not pleased. The agency got their hands on a copy of the petition and specifically noted that Malcolm X claimed, I have gotten several promises of support in our plight before the UN this year. The New York Times, the unofficial mouthpiece of Washington, D.C. bureaucracy, interpreted Malcolm's remarks in Cairo thusly. Malcolm X attacks the U.S. Through the Times, Washington sent Malcolm a warning to stand down on his position. The State Department, CIA, the Justice Department, FBI, have begun to take an interest in Malcolm's campaign to convince African states to raise the question of persecution of American Negroes at the United Nations. The black nationalist leader started his campaign July 17th in Cairo, where the 33 heads of independent African states held their second meeting since the Organization of African Unity was founded in Addis Ababa 14 months ago. Malcolm's 8-page memorandum to the heads of state at the Cairo conference requesting their support became available here only recently. After studying it, officials said that if Malcolm succeeded in convincing just one African government to bring up the charge at the United Nations, the United States government would be faced with a touchy problem. The United States officials here believe would find itself in the same category as South Africa, Hungary, and other countries whose domestic politics have become debating issues at the United Nations. The issue, officials say, would be of service to critics of the United States, communists and non-communists, and contribute to the undermining of the position of the United States as asserted for itself as a leader of the West in advocacy of human rights. Although the State Department's interest in Malcolm's activities in Africa is obvious, that of the Justice Department is shrouded in discretion. Malcolm is regarded as an implacable leader with deep roots in the Negro submerged classes. Implacable, an adjective meaning unable to be placated, relentless, unstoppable. This is how the government, through the mouthpiece of the New York Times, described the growing menace called Malcolm X if he succeeded in convincing the African government to bring up the charge of the United Nations at the United Nations. The United States would have been a touchy problem. The CIA does not like America to have such touchy problems. On August 10th, the Near East and Africa Division of the Directorate of Plans sent Ben Reed a thermal fax updating him on Malcolm X's current activities, and there were many activities that perturbed the United States government. Malcolm then built on the foundations he had laid at the African Summit. For 4 months, he crisscrossed Africa, holding follow-up meetings with the leaders who encouraged him most in Cairo. He held long discussions with President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, President Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Prime Minister Milton Obote of Uganda, President Azikiwe of Nigeria, President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Prime Minister Ahmed Ben Bella of Algeria, President Sekou Touré of Guinea. There were other African heads of state Malcolm talked with, he said, whose names I can't mention. At the height of the Cold War, Malcolm X had gained access to Africa's most revolutionary leaders on a politically explosive issue. Reflecting on these meetings, Malcolm told a friend in London shortly before his death, "Those talks broadened my outlook and made it more crystal clear to me that I had to look at the struggle in American ghettos against the background of a worldwide struggle of oppressed peoples. That's why, after every one of my trips abroad, American rulers see me as being more and more dangerous. That's why I feel in my bones the plots to kill me have already been hatched in high places. The triggermen will only be doing what they were paid to do." Malcolm's influences among the Africans did indeed disturb American officials there. As he recounted, "When I was in Kenya, the U.S. ambassador came to me and asked me not to speak out so strongly against the conditions of Southern Negroes because it hurt our image among Africans. I told him that instead of attempting to quiet me, he should tell the U.S. government to put an end to the oppression of black people both here and in Africa." In September 1964, the FBI issued its Harlem Riots report. It mentions no names, but by detailed description and accurate quotation, it identifies Malcolm X as one of 4 troublemakers of the riots, along with communist socialists Milton Rosen, William Epton, and Jesse Gray. Further, White House aide Ben Reed complained to the CIA that Malcolm X's affiliations with Third World leaders were damaging American foreign policy in Africa. Robert E. Lee, the State Department's Assistant Secretary for Congressional Relations, reported to his bosses that although African leaders were reluctant to support Malcolm X's proposal, the propaganda which was generated by his extreme statements may have caused some damage to the United States image. Information has come to our attention that Malcolm K. Little, aka Malcolm X, in the course of his recent tour of Middle East and African states, has reportedly been in communication and contact with heads of state, with heads of foreign governments, urging that they take the issue of racialism in America before the United Nations as a threat to world peace. Such activities could conceivably fall within the provisions of the Logan Act, and moreover deemed to be inimical to the best interests of our country, prejudicial to foreign policy, or requesting the Secretary of State to make appropriate inquiries of our embassies in the Middle East and Africa for any pertinent information concerning Malcolm X's alleged contacts and communication with heads of foreign governments. We would also appreciate having your Bureau furnish us with information which you may receive concerning Malcolm X's activities abroad indicating a possible violation of the Logan Act. Malcolm X's activities were deemed inimical to U.S. interests and damaging to U.S. policy in Africa. So the CIA sent a man in Malcolm X's wake to undo the political damage he had done. Malcolm returned to the United States from his second tour on November 24, 1964, and immediately blasted President Johnson for his Congo policy. To counter Malcolm's influence in Africa, the United States government, specifically the CIA, selected Corps' James Farmer. Through its front company, the American Society for African Culture, AMSAC, the CIA funded Farmer's 5 weeks in Africa, visiting the countries Malcolm had previously visited. Farmer's job was to serve as a living rebuttal to Malcolm X. Carl Rowan of the United States Information Agency, the first African American to sit on the National Security Council, briefed Farmer before his trip. Malcolm heard on the radio about Farmer's pending trip, and on the day before Farmer's departure, Malcolm visited him in his home. According to Farmer, Malcolm asked him not to damage his reputation in Egypt, a major source of his funding. "I'm not going there," Farmer told Malcolm. Farmer promptly passed this information on to his CIA financiers. One CIA memo on Malcolm reveals that in December the agency learned subject Malcolm X recently revealed that he is currently being financed by the Egyptian government. Subject made this statement in the course of a discussion. Subject stated that he feared that the Egyptian government would decrease its funding if his subjects or decrease its funding of his subjects' organization. Report of financial support offered to Malcolm from several African and Arab states disturbed the United States government. Malcolm was reportedly offered 2 jobs, one from Kwame Nkrumah, Prime Minister of Ghana, to be his anti-American speechwriter as well as policy advisor on East-West relations. The second was from Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who wanted to put Malcolm in charge of the African section of Cairo's foreign ministry. Part 9. The government sets the date for Malcolm's murder. Malcolm continued to grow as a thorn in America's African policy side. Malcolm X had a very strong presence at the United Nations in New York, where he enjoyed great privileges. After his close friend Alex Kazon-Saki of Ghana was elected president of the United Nations General Assembly on December 1st, 1964, Kazon-Saki arranged for Malcolm to have his own office at the UN to organize his human rights campaign. Without portfolio or accreditation, Malcolm made the world body his forum. It is reported that because his political friends enabled him to treat the UN as his political headquarters, Malcolm was able to practice some shadow diplomacy whose potential influence reached far beyond Harlem. Malcolm was often in the center of diplomatic parties at the UN, and security guards had orders not to challenge Malcolm as he strode the halls of the World Court with no credentials. Ben Reed sent several State Department reports on Malcolm to CIA Deputy Director for Plans Richard Helms in early December 1964. That same month, Malcolm's shadow diplomacy and his efforts to internationalize the Negro problem paid off during the Congo debate at the UN, much to the alarm of the United States, as M.S. Handler reported. The spokesman of some African states acted precisely within the framework of Malcolm X's recommendations last month. In the Congo debate at the United Nations, they accused the United States with being indifferent to the fate of blacks and cited as evidence the attitude of the United States government toward the civil rights struggle in Mississippi. The African move profoundly disturbed the American authorities. At the same time, the New York Times terrified white America by reporting on December 21st, 1964, Malcolm favors a Mau Mau in United States. The paper described the Mau Mau as the anti-white terrorists active in Kenya before the country gained independence. It appears that in January 1965, the government decided to pull the trigger on Malcolm X, and further plots to kill him were hatched. The New York Times Journal American reported, according to the police spokesman, the department knew in mid-January that an attempt was to be made on Malcolm's life. As Brightman and Porter write, the police spokesman did not say how they knew, but we know they knew. On January 29, 1965, the Los Angeles Police Intelligence Unit alerted the Chicago Police Department to their intelligence that Malcolm would be killed publicly in New York. Captain William Duffy, commander of the Chicago Police Intelligence Division, confirmed that at the end of January, informed sources told him the murder of Malcolm was planned to be a public event. On February 2nd, 1965, the FBI New York SAC reported to Director Hoover that Malcolm was traveling to London on February 5th and to France on February 8th, where he would remain until February 11th. Hoover was also informed that the next scheduled OAAU rally is on February 21st, 1965, i.e. the day Malcolm was publicly assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom. On February 1st, 1965, a profoundly important meeting occurred in Accra, Ghana. James Farmer was there to meet with President Kwame Nkrumah and was tracked down by an African American expatriate living in Ghana who was an activist from New York and mutual acquaintance of Farmer's and Malcolm X's. Farmer never reveals his name. He met with her at his hotel restaurant at Ghana's Flagstaff House. Farmer recounts, and it is worth quoting in full, "I got to my room and placed a call to Flagstaff House to seek an audience with President Kwame Nkrumah. Immediately afterward, I received a call from a young black American woman I had known in the States. She had read in the papers of my coming and had called the leading hotels to find where I was registered. I invited her to come by and have dinner with me that evening so we could renew our acquaintance. In the hotel dining room, we shared a bottle of Ghanaian beer before dinner, as I brought her up to date on the movement back in our country. Malcolm was here a couple months ago, and I had dinner with him too," she said abruptly, becoming serious. "I know. He told me. He is going to be killed, you know." She dropped that remark in a matter-of-fact way. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Malcolm says that. Everybody else says it. And now you are saying it. I think it's just a rumor, but okay, if he's going to be killed, when is it going to happen?" She put her glass of beer down with a napkin dabbled at the moisture of the glass had deposited on the tablecloth. Then she studied the ceiling. "Now let's see," she said. "This is February. He'll be killed sometime between now and April 1st. I almost jumped from my seat. That's only 2 months. That's calling it pretty close, isn't it?" She nodded. "You must know something," I said again. She nodded. "Then who's going to kill him? The black Muslims?" "Oh, no, no, no." She was now talking in a whisper, and I leaned closer to her. "The Muslims are after him, but I think they just want to beat him up to teach him a lesson. One of them might shoot him, but it would be sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing, not on orders from Elijah Muhammad. There is another gang, far more dangerous than the Muslim, that's going to get him, and it will be blamed on the Nation of Islam." "Who is this other group?" "I have nothing more to say on the subject," she said with finality, "and if you quote me, I'll deny I ever saw you." When I continued to press her on the identity of that group, according to her, was going to murder Malcolm, she became almost hysterical, glancing furtively about the room. I dropped the subject. This is explosive." The young woman clearly had inside knowledge that CIA asset James Farmer found credible. Sometime within the next 2 weeks, Malcolm X will fall victim to a false flag operation. He will be killed by a gang much bigger than the Nation of Islam. But the black Muslims will be blamed for the murder. That is exactly how the plot to kill Malcolm X actually unfolded. 3 weeks after his revelation in Ghana, Malcolm X was gunned down at the Audubon Ballroom, and the Nation of Islam was blamed for the murder. The assassination was a false flag operation. The day after the assassination, Farmer held a conference which he opened with the words, "The black Muslims did not kill him." Malcolm's murder was a political killing with international implications. "Most people," Farmer said, "are leaping to the easy conclusion that the black Muslims killed Malcolm. The explanation is much deeper, much more sinister. It has international implications. Farmer knew what he was speaking of. This all reveals an important timeline. January 15th, 1965. By this time, some members of the NYPD know of the plan to assassinate Malcolm X. January 29th, 1965. It is reported that the intelligence agencies also know that Malcolm was soon to be publicly assassinated. February 21st, 1965. CIA asset James Farmer is warned in Ghana of Malcolm's impending assassination by forces bigger and more dangerous than the Nation of Islam. These forces will falsely blame the nation for the assassination. February 2nd, 1965, the New York SAC notifies FBI Director Hoover that Malcolm's organization, OAAU, will next hold a public rally on Sunday, February 21st, 1965, the day Malcolm is killed. Something else happened at this time. After word went out in January among law enforcement and intelligence agencies that Malcolm X was soon to be publicly murdered, and after CIA asset James Farmer on February 1st was given a heads up that Malcolm was to be killed between that time and April, and the true killers were going to have the murder blamed on the black Muslims. Then, that very week, Talmadge Hayer, was recontacted at the beginning of February and again offered money to kill Malcolm X. The domestic operation is back on. Phase 2. Hayer confessed during his trial. Question: you say you were offered some money? Answer: yes, sir. Question: to kill Malcolm X? Answer: yes, sir. Question: when do you say you were first approached by anybody in connection with the assassination of Malcolm X? Answer: sometime in February. I guess beginning of February. This is an important detail, whose significance is this. In late May 1965, the CIA opened a clandestine services operation against Malcolm X. In early June, J. Edgar Hoover ordered his New York office to do something about Malcolm X. And in June, an FBI informant received information that Malcolm X is going to be bumped off. In early June, also, Talmadge Hayer and the New Jersey Kill Team were first recruited to assassinate Malcolm X. In July, Malcolm X left the country and went to Africa, putting him out of reach of the domestic assassination team. The operation to terminate Malcolm X was thus handled as a foreign operation. On July 23rd, Malcolm X was poisoned in Egypt, barely surviving with his life. The first foreign assassination attempt failed. Malcolm returned to the U.S. in November. In late January 1965, the plans to publicly assassinate Malcolm X were made and shared with various intelligence services. And in early February 1965, Talmadge Hayer was reproached and again offered money to kill Malcolm X, which he did on February 21st, 1965. Bossy Lieutenant Tony Bouza confirmed the assassination of Malcolm X Little on February 21st, 1965, in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem had been foreseen by the Bureau of Special Services at least 2 weeks before the killing occurred. 2 weeks would be around February 7th, 1965. We get another reference to this date. Peter Goldman's NYPD sources told him, the New York police got wind 2 weeks in advance that the last successful attentat was imminent. Attentat is an assault attempt. 2 weeks before the 21st, which means around February 7th, the NYPD got wind, i.e., got an intelligence report, informing them that in contrast to previous unsuccessful attempts to kill Malcolm X, the last attempt to kill him was coming soon, and it will be successful. When and what were the previous attentats that failed? Cairo, July 23, 1964, was one failed attempt. On February 9, 1965, Malcolm was barred from France. When his plane landed at Orly Airport in Paris, he was disallowed to disembark. 9 police, along with the French government officials, met Malcolm X at the plane. The officials had in hand a government order declaring his presence undesirable, but they gave him no reason why this was so. In April 1965, a little more than a month after Malcolm X was assassinated, journalist Eric Norden was told by a highly placed North African diplomat that his country's intelligence service had been quietly informed by the French Department of Alien Documentation and Counter-Espionage that the CIA planned Malcolm's murder, and France feared he might be liquidated on its soil, and scapegoat France. France passed that info on because that North African country had hosted Malcolm X in the past. This diplomat told Norden, your CIA is beginning to murder its own citizens now. For reasons elaborated upon our larger writing, I believe that this diplomat from a North African country recently visited by Malcolm X was Moroccan. Malcolm X visited Casablanca in May 1964. On June 21st, the president requested Hoover silence/terminate Malcolm X. On June 23rd, Malcolm X was poisoned in Cairo and barely escaped with his life. The poisoning was reportedly a CIA operation, and maybe a CIA Mossad operation. While the White House missed on this first attempt to put the quietus on Malcolm, there would be 2 more attempts. February 9th, 1965, in Paris was another failed attentat. Around 2 weeks before the final act, it appears that the final kill decision was made, and it was decided that February 21st at the Audubon Ballroom would be the last successful attentat on Malcolm X. This time, they will not miss. Within minutes of Malcolm X being gunned down at the Audubon, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was fast in the loop. He would almost immediately relay the word to President Johnson. Mission accomplished. And here is a tree of the actors involved in the Malcolm X assassination. There is Leo Clinton Aldridge, aka Leo Milas, CIA agent assigned to Malcolm X. Part 10. CIA assets around Malcolm X. And here's a quote from Malcolm X, Death is a Prophet. Uh, One of my close associates, my bodyguard, is a CIA man. I know this in my blood. I feel it, but yet I can't accuse. Wilfred Little, Malcolm X's eldest brother, who introduced him to the nation and who was the minister of Detroit in 1965, affirmed that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is innocent of Malcolm's slaying. According to Wilfred's information, the Muslims who shot Malcolm were joined by and then steered by an outsider to do dastardly deeds. Wilfred reveals that before the assassination, Malcolm was warned that agents believed to be from the CIA were offering money for his death. Similarly, Malcolm X's half-sister, Ella Collins, who inherited leadership of the OAAU and the Muslim Mosque Incorporated after Malcolm's death, conducted her own investigation into the murder of her brother and discovered many important facts. She states flatly, "The CIA murdered my brother. I know that the CIA instigated Malcolm's death. There's no doubt in my mind. I would never say I believe or think it was supposed to happen in Egypt when he was poisoned. It was supposed to have taken place in France, and the State Department in France became aware of it and would not allow him to come in the country." She discounted speculation that the Nation of Islam was to blame for her brother's death. In the days leading up to his assassination, Malcolm shared with Ella his conviction that it was neither the NOI or the FBI that had him in their crosshairs, but the CIA. She told Eric Norton, "On the day before his death, which was a Saturday, we spent the day together. He discussed the fact that the way his house was bombed and his being barred from France led him to believe that the plotters of his death was much bigger than the Muslims. In discussing the firebombing, we both agreed that with our experience of black people's methods of revenge on each other, that this was not the work of black people." Her son and Malcolm's nephew, Rodnell Collins, has described the conversation Malcolm and Ella had Saturday night before the assassination. Malcolm also told Ma that events of the past month had forced him to reconsider who was the force behind the attacks he was subjected to. "I know what John Ali and the nation can and cannot do," he said. "I don't even believe it's the FBI anymore. It's the CIA behind all of this. They're extremely afraid of my contacts in Africa and Asia." It was that statement by Malcolm which later led Ma to resist those who wanted her to approve of revenge-driven attacks on members of the Nation of Islam. That Saturday, February 20th, Malcolm also shared with Ella his suspicions that at least 4 of his top aides were disloyal to him. Malcolm's suspicions proved true. As Ella reported, "I was informed during my investigation that many of Malcolm's top security men had warned witnesses who saw the assassination from close range to keep quiet, say nothing when they were questioned by the district attorney. Why would these so-called protectors of Malcolm hold evidence and warn others to hold evidence that would aid the DA in building the state case, in apprehending more of the killers, and in bringing them to justice? Members of Malcolm's security gave testimony in court favorable to the defense. They did not appear as hostile witnesses. Some who testified for the state had previously informed me of opposite information to what they gave on the witness stand. Security men stood by and did nothing, and none were called to testify at the trial. All this indicates that many people were aware of the planned assassination. Some of these targets, some of these suspect aides of Malcolm were likely assets of the U.S. intelligence apparatus that targeted the black leader. Ella reported, "I have been informed by reliable sources that there were CIA agents right in the organization of Afro-American Unity, and I've been given their names. Malcolm knew the dangers, but he said he had to go ahead." Her son makes an allusion to one of these CIA agents that was around Malcolm X. Malcolm's nephew, Rodnell Collins, is convinced his uncle's killer was a mystery Asian man who fled the country. That mysterious Asian man was likely Seizo Takahara, one of at least two CIA assets that we can identify around Malcolm X and his organization. The other was Anas Lukman, the black-coated ninja. There's a picture of Anas Lukman at the looks like the assassination. One of the most intriguing men around Malcolm X was Langston 2X Savage, later known as Anas Lukman and Lukman Abdul Rahim. Before he died on December 24, 2013 at Shands Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, Anas Lukman shared pieces of his story with Manning Marable, Les Payne, Ital Iman, and Sharif Nasir. Independent journalist Ital Iman spent considerable time with him from 2010 to 2014. Langston Savage was a Navy man, born July 14, 1934, in North Carolina. He was the only black person in his naval class, trained in ballistics and clandestine ship capture. Langston likely was connected with the Office of Naval Intelligence. While an active Navy officer, he made contact with Fidel Castro, allegedly to join the Cuban Revolution. This suggests an ONI covert operation. Castro reportedly told Langston this was not possible due to agreements with the USA. At this time, Castro was a friend of the United States. The CIA assisted his revolution against Cuban President Fulgencio Batista. The two men, Castro and Langston, reportedly agreed to meet once Langston was ostensibly no longer obligated to the United States Navy. Langston eventually did join Castro in Cuba, where he reportedly acquired demolition training and trained as an assassin under Albert Bayo, the famous Cuban military leader who also trained Fidel Castro. Langston was given a letter from Fidel Castro which allowed him to move freely within revolutionary circles, we are told. Langston, the Navy man, was an international mercenary. Rahim was something of a mystery man with a shadowy background. Les and Tamara Payne report Rahim was a weapons and explosives expert and had served abroad as a mercenary in Mexico and North Africa. Ital Iman says he was a ninja. He was an assassin. Langston was reportedly hired by American intelligence to kill foreign heads of state and topple governments of small countries. He claimed that a few jobs were turned down, which means there were jobs that he did accept. On one occasion, while in a library, a CIA operative approached him with a job to assassinate Salvador Allende, who was elected in 1970 as the 28th president of Chile and first Marxist leader of the country. After traveling to Chile and learning the details of the job, Langston rejected it. There were children involved, he said. The CIA used someone else for the job, but Langston remained in the agency's good graces, and thus usable. This was after the assassination of Malcolm X, which means Langston was still a U.S. intelligence asset long after that fateful day. As a naval officer, Langston tried to infiltrate Castro's 1959 revolution. As an intelligence asset, he joined the Nation of Islam in New York in July 1962. I did not join the NOI for spiritual reasons, he said to Ital Iman. I joined because I heard those brothers was about revolution, some land for self, things like that. Langston's intelligence connections are highlighted by the story of his clandestine meeting with Ralph Bunche, which occurred before Malcolm X's assassination. The meeting took place on a golf course and lasted several hours. Langston posed as Bunche's caddy. This clandestine meeting is highly important as it involved two members of the intelligence community that were secretly meeting and discussing Malcolm X. According to the magazine Soldiers of Fortune, Bunche was an African American leader in the intelligence community. He was part of America's most important intelligence first, Office of Strategic Services. During World War II, Bunche worked for the CIA's predecessor agency, providing intelligence about developments in African territories. He was recruited in 1941 by the Office of the Coordinator of Information, COI, where he served as a senior analyst specializing in African affairs and later chief of the African Division. One of the reasons Bunche looked pleasing to the intelligence community was his 1934 Harvard doctoral dissertation, where he showed himself to be hostile to black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. In 1944, Bunche transferred to the State Department, where he was the first black desk officer. In 1945, Bunche became head of the Division of Dependent Affairs. Ital Iman alleges that the point of this clandestine meeting on the golf course was to conscript Bunche into Malcolm's revolutionary movement, to convince him to pull some governmental strings to help pull off the Black Revolution. This is transparently a cover story, for certainly Anas Luqman knew better than that. Bunche was demonstrably anti-revolution and anti-Pan-Africanism. He was hostile to the radical nationalists of Africa. Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, and the Congo's Patrice Lumumba. The U.S. saw Lumumba as an African Fidel Castro, and Bunche had a sharp animosity and contempt for him, whom he felt was too influenced by Pan-Africanism to be friendly to Western interests. The UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld, played a decisive role in the overthrow of the Lumumba Congolese government. He said to U.S. diplomats, "Lumumba must be broken." Representing Hammarskjöld, and his objective in the Congo was Ralph Bunche, as a member of the Secretary General's inner circle of trusted advisors dealing with the Congo question. Bunche did take part in the decisions whose ultimate result was the fall of Patrice Lumumba, the Congo's first democratically elected prime minister. This is the man with whom Langston clandestinely met for hours on a golf course discussing Malcolm X, the Asian assassin. In some of the larger temples, there were secret groups of enforcers within the FOI who were given advanced physical combat training in order to carry out planned assaults on the hypocrites. New York's Honor Squad was also known as the Elite Squad and Pipe Squad, which was trained by both its war veteran martial arts captain Joseph Gravitt and Korean karate master who was granted membership in the mosque. Sensei Takahata was the most notorious of these secret groups. James 67X Warden had recently brought in a mysterious karate master, Sensei Takahara. The tall Asian instructed a small group of Muslims in an extraordinarily high level of Qigong, a major component of martial arts. The tall Asian Sensei Takahara, also called Seizo Takahara, provided the special training to the notorious Honor Guard of New York's Temple No. 7. Abraham Bay, an ex-FOI who joined Malcolm X after the split, informed the grand jury that the No. 7 rostrum guards got training in karate on Saturdays from Leon X. Amir. However, a special martial arts training was given to some FOI outside of the mosque by an Okinawan. This training was used for defense against a karate man. Bay called it Ikeido, which is an Okinawan form of karate. This special training was given at night after mosque meetings and outside the mosque so as not to let the rest of the mosque know what kind of training the men were getting. This training included the use of firearms, which was a violation of Nation of Islam rules. After Malcolm X's split from the Nation, Seizo Takahara left the Nation and trained Malcolm's men. Anas Lukman was among those who got this special training. He had a close relationship with Takahara and spoke fondly of the Oriental element of leadership that he brought, telling Ital Iman, "Well, he's one who's qualified to lead." Seizo Takahara apparently was at the center of a gun counterculture that had developed in the Nation of Islam. The possession or use of firearms was strictly prohibited within the Nation of Islam. Against this policy, Anas Lukman tells us about the specialized gun training that Seizo Takahara provided to select FOI and later to Malcolm's men. The sensei's favorite gun was the .357 Magnum. James 67X, the right-hand man, who also had a black belt in karate, kept the loaded .357 Magnum that had been given to him by Sensei Takahara, Payne tells us. A number of his trainees extolled Seizo Takahara's Neo-like extra-human abilities with a gun, and he was a crack shot with a rifle or handgun. "He was it," said Anas Lukman. "He had human abilities that you just don't see in most people." He reportedly had exceptional skill in dodging bullets. He trained a select group in that. In a very scenic manner, Benjamin Kareem Benjamin 2X Goodman expresses the same mystification of the sensei to Spike Lee. Lee described his conversation with Kareem in his 1992 book with Ralph Wiley, By Any Means Necessary. The brothers close around Malcolm weren't afraid of anything, Benjamin said. Brother John 57X, Brother Ivory, a few others, they all had been trained in deadly hand-to-hand combat. One night, Sensei took us out for training and told a brother, Cyril, to get in his car and drive toward him at precisely 60 miles per hour. He, Sensei, would just stand there. Cyril balked and said, Nah, Sensei. So Sensei ordered him. His job was to train FOI, the fruit of Islam. So Cyril, being a young brother, he had to do what Sensei said. Cyril got in the car and gunned it toward him. Sensei just stood there. He just stood there. Then he jumped, folded barely, touched the roof of the car with his feet. When he came down, he was squatting with a pistol, and the sight was on the car. That was Sensei. Spike Lee says, Me, I was kind of skeptical, so I said, he was like James Bond, eh? Or more like Action Jackson. Benjamin Kareem says, no, Mr. Lee. Brother Minister used to say one never needs to read fiction because the truth is stranger. Sensei was a real person, an exceptional person. I asked him one night at the restaurant if he was going to teach the other brothers the martial arts. He said, No, I'm going to teach them death. So I asked Benjamin if this sensei was a Muslim himself, and he said yes, he knew the Quran almost by heart. Benjamin said, I believe his mother was Oriental and his father was black, but he was a brother, believe me, and the way he appeared to have no use for whites was hardened in him. As a matter of fact, even when we met him years before this, we were the ones in the nation and he was calling them devils. Thomas 15X Johnson Khalil Islam tells us, I had a Chinese sensei teaching me. This was no doubt a reference to the above-mentioned Special Honor Guard training by Okinawan Sensei Seizo Takahara. Thomas 15X also tells us, I was the first official to be caught with a firearm. We didn't train in firearms, and we were told not to participate with firearms. When the police arrested him for the shooting of Benjamin Brown, they found in Thomas 15X's home a .22 caliber Winchester rifle. As noted above, the possession of weapons on the person or in the home is against religious law of the Nation of Islam. Thomas 15X was thus banned from coming to the New York Temple. Seizo Takahara was likely not Korean, as Patrick Bowen surmised, but Japanese. Both James 67X Warden and Ibrahim Bey referred to him as Okinawan. Okinawan is a Japanese dialect, and Okinawa is a Japanese island. Karate originally was Okinawan. Indeed, Takahara's ancient namesake, Peichin Takahara, was born in 1683 at Akata-cho, a small section of the city of Shuri, Okinawa. This Peichin, Senior Takahara, was a monk, a highly learned man, an astronomer, and a map maker, and a great warrior, acknowledged as the first to expound on the principles of Do, the way. He is known as the father of Okinawan karate and the master of death. His fighting style was Chuan, Fa, the first way. Peichin Takahara died in 1760. Immediately after Malcolm X returned to the United States in May 21, 1964, from his first tour of Africa, the CIA initiated a The CIA initiated a clandestine services operation against him, and within days, the five-man kill team from Paterson and Newark, New Jersey was recruited. Carl Evans informed us regarding this team. They met with a party who remains unidentified but who allegedly trained them in the art of assassination and paid for their time. We can identify that team who trained the assassins. Spike Lee reports. Benjamin Kareem said some of Malcolm's group plotted to kill the sensei character because they suspected he had something to do with Malcolm's assassination, because much of his training stemmed from the Oriental martial arts methodology. And one of those arts was something Benjamin called Chung Fa. I think it was, and one of the legends of that discipline is a legend of the 5 archers sent to assassinate a statesman. There were 5 people involved in Malcolm X's assassination, and the people involved in it were very well trained. According to Anas Luqman, Seizo Takahara was an Asian man commissioned by CIA or State Department to infiltrate the Nation of Islam, a government agent of Asian descent who infiltrated the Nation of Islam and was responsible for the murder of Malcolm X. In an interesting videotaped conversation between Anas Luqman and Aital Iman, the latter asks, "So, what role Seizo Takahara play in the assassination?" Luqman unhesitantly answered, "He, Takahara, was one of the ones who helped the enemies of Malcolm and the black race bring him to an end." Luqman says he, Takahara, chose to be an enemy of one who always tried to be a friend, i.e. Malcolm. As recounted independently by Aital Iman and Sharif Nasir, Luqman revealed that Seizo Takahara was hired by the government and sent to oversee the death of Malcolm. He trained the hit team that killed Malcolm X. In light of Seizo Takahara's assignment to train the killers of Malcolm X, the following takes on added significance. Gene Roberts had been introduced to hand-to-hand combat during basic training in the Navy. His karate skills, however, were greatly intensified under the mat training of James 67X, an accomplished black belt who was Malcolm's top assistant. "James was our martial arts instructor," Roberts said. "Sometimes I'd go one-on-one with him. He taught me a lot." James had recently brought a mysterious karate master, Sensei Takahara. The tall Asian instructed a small group of Muslims in an extraordinary high level of Qigong, a major component of martial arts. The contact with James 67X and the specialized training had earned Roberts his Monday night spot on the front rostrum security detail. James 67X, the right-hand man, who also had a black belt in karate, kept a loaded .357 Magnum that had been given to him by Sensei Takahara, who had continued to train Malcolm's men in the advanced level of Qigong, which he had also taught to Gene Roberts. The fact that bossy undercover agent Gene Roberts received special training from James Takahara is significant. Seizo Takahara occasionally slept at the house of James Sabaz, James 67X warden. The Secretary and Chief Assistant of Malcolm X. Apparently so too did confessed assassin Talmadge Hayer sleep at James Sabaz's house. James Sabaz told the Assistant District Attorney's Office on April 1st, 1965, that living with me was at the time of the assassination of Malcolm X, Langston Savage, Chester McCollin, myself, and sometimes Sensei, the Okinawan, slept there on some nights. Sensei had a school for karate in the Bronx. James Shabazz didn't voluntarily disclose to the assistant district attorney that the killer of Malcolm X, who was caught at the scene of the crime, Talmadge Hayer, had also been a housemate at the time. But the assistant district attorney had that information. An assistant DA's office note for April 1st, 1965 mentions James Shabazz testified in grand jury, denies knowing Hayer. We have persons who say Hayer lived with Shabazz. We have persons who say Hayer lived in Shabazz's house. One of those persons was Chester Gullum, who told the assistant district attorney that in the spring of 1964, Hayer stayed for nights in James Shabazz's apartment at 113th Street and Manhattan Avenue. The spring of 1964 is when the CIA initiated the clandestine services operation against Malcolm X, and it is when the shooter team was recruited and trained. So according to what these persons told the district attorney's office, the acknowledged assassin of Malcolm X, Talmadge Hayer, stayed at times or lived in the house of James Shabazz, the same house that provided shelter for Langston 2X Savage, the renowned contract killer for American intelligence, and Seizo Takahara, the CIA assets sent to infiltrate the Nation of Islam and later to train the assassins of Malcolm X. Hayer was one of those assassins. Did he get some of his training while living in James Shabazz's house? Identity of shotgun shooter known early. In the declassified 1953 CIA assassination manual, In the declassified 1953 CIA assassination manual, the agency recommends the use of the shotgun as the most effective to carry out executive actions or political assassinations. In guarded assassination, a large bore shotgun is a most effective killing instrument as long as the range is kept under 10 yards. It should normally be used only on single targets as it cannot sustain fire successfully. The barrel may be sawed off for convenience, but this is not a significant factor in its killing performance. The assassin should aim for the solar plexus as the shot pattern is small at close range and can is ineligible the head. It was the shotgun that felled Malcolm X on February 21st, 1965. The follow-up pistol shots were overkill. The primary assassin rested a sawed-off 12-gauge J.C. Higgins double-barrel shotgun on the crook of his arm like a professional, and fired 2 blasts from about 8 feet away from the stage, as recommended in the 1953 CIA Assassin Manual. This weapon's buckshot is typically used for hunting large game. At close range, victims do not stand a chance. The pellets from the first barrel blasted through the plywood lectern and into Malcolm's chest. The second barrel then blasted. Malcolm suffered 13 pellet wounds in the heart and chest. The assassin seems to have been aiming at the solar plex. Several eyewitness accounts suggest that the shotgun shooter, after discharging the second blast, dropped the weapon and ran down the corridor right of the stage and ducked into the women's lavatory. located about 60 feet from the stage. He ran down a narrow flight of stairs leading to an exit about He ran down a narrow flight of stairs leading to an exit out to the street. He got away clean, reporter Jimmy Breslin tells us. Breslin broke the story of the assassination in the Monday, February 22nd, 1965 morning edition of the New York Herald Tribune. From a seat in the back of the ballroom, he had a bird's eye view to the murder. While the shotgun shooter got away clean, Breslin informed us from his high-level police sources the identity of the man who went out the side door and got away was known to police, and they combed Harlem for him last night. The police knew, Sunday night, the identity of the shotgun shooter. Why was he never located and arrested? We know the answer to this question. On February 22nd, 1965, the FBI had a detailed and accurate description of the assassin who wielded the shotgun. A memo reads, description of only one other assailant has been determined. He is a Negro male, age 28, 6 feet 2 inches, 200 pounds, heavy build, dark complexion, wearing gray coat, and believed to be assailant who used shotguns. Witness Ernest Green saw the shotgun shooter and described him as stout and very dark and had a very deep beard. Malcolm X associate and FBI informant Leon X. Amir attended Malcolm X's funeral on February 27, 1965. As an NYPD informant and with a police escort, while at the funeral, Amir had a conversation with former members of the Newark, New Jersey Temple number 25. One of them was present at the Audubon on the 21st. On March 10, Amir called the Boston FBI field office and claimed he could identify the men who killed Malcolm X. Amir requested an FBI interview. A meeting was arranged on March 12th in Amir's Sherry Biltmore hotel room. An FBI memo indicates that Leon 4X Amir was indeed interviewed by an FBI agent on the evening of the 12th and revealed the information he learned at the funeral. The March 12, 1965 memo says, who was registered at the Sherry Biltmore Hotel, Boston, Massachusetts, Bureau deletion, was interviewed at the Sherry Biltmore Hotel by an FBI agent. As we assume that the deletions are Leon 4X Amir, stated that he attended the funeral of Malcolm X Little in New York City. He claims that on his arrival in New York City, he was taken into protective custody and was allowed to attend the funeral. Subsequent to the funeral, he went to a friend's home for the evening and then returned to Boston, Massachusetts. While at the funeral, he chatted with former members of the Newark Nation of Islam temple, who he recognized from having had contact with them while visiting the temple. However, that he does not know them by name. One of these was present when Malcolm was shot. This man described the person who had handled the shotgun as a tall, dark-skinned Negro whom he recognized as a member of the Newark temple, but whom he did not know by name. He believes that this former Muslim who told him this identified the Negro who handled the shotgun as a lieutenant of the Newark temple. The man handling the shotgun shot from the hip and appeared to be an expert in the handling of this type of gun. On guard at the rostrum at which Malcolm X was speaking were Robert 35X, formerly of the New York Temple, Charles 26X, formerly of the Newark Temple, when the distraction was created just before Malcolm was shot. Both of these guards left the immediate area of the rostrum, which is in violation of the rules of standing post, but both in Muslim temples and in Malcolm Little's organization. The fact made the persons participating in the discussion convinced that the shooting was a conspiracy in which the two guards participated. Has no actual factual evidence, has no factual knowledge about such a conspiracy, how the shooting occurred, or who participated in it. The man who started the distraction by claiming someone's hand was in his pocket was described as a short, dark-skinned Negro with bushy hair and a mustache, who was believed to be a member of the Newark Temple. These former members of the Newark Temple shared vital information with Amir. The one present at the Autobahn told Amir he recognized the tall, dark-skinned shotgun shooter as a member of the Newark Temple, though he did not know this man's name. He thought he was lieutenant of the Newark Temple. The man handled a shotgun, shot from the hip, and appeared to be an expert in handling of this type of gun. This former Newark Muslim also recognized the man who caused the distraction by shouting, "Get your hand out of my pocket." This short, dark-skinned man with bushy hair and a mustache was also believed to be a member of the Newark Temple. Because the rostrum guards Robert 35X Smith, formerly from the New York Temple, and Charles 26X Blackwell, formerly of the Newark Temple, violated the rules of their post by abandoning their position when the bushy-haired Newark man caused his distractions, these persons talking to Amir were convinced that the shooting was a conspiracy in which the two guards participated. Amir thus had in his possession, on February 27th, key details of the plot to kill Malcolm X. At least two of the kill team, the shotgun shooter and the decoy, were at one time members of Newark's Temple 25 and 2. This kill team collaborated in an assassination of Malcolm X's own security detail. The two rostrum guards who abandoned their posts were part of the conspiracy. Amir had at this early date the nucleus of the plot. He shared this information with the FBI agent in his hotel room in the evening of March 12th. On the morning of March 13th, the chambermaid found Amir dead in his room. Less than 24 hours after a visit from the FBI, Amir was dead. The assassin he described was never arrested for the role in Malcolm's murder. While the FBI knew Leon 4X to be prone to lie, this information that he received at the funeral the Bureau took very serious long after Amir's mysterious death. I suspect it was Amir's knowledge of the identity of the shotgun shooter and the Newark personnel involved in the hit that cost Amir his life. Amir was an unreliable FBI informant, according to the FBI's own assessment. Amir could neither be trusted nor controlled, the Bureau concluded. Yet Amir's revelations to the Boston FBI agent on March 12th was still disturbing the Bureau in April. The FBI seems to have been alarmed at the possibility that those who were not in the know at the New York City Police Department would come into knowledge of this Newark connection. When Amir traveled from Boston to New York to attend Malcolm X's funeral and was escorted by New York police, the FBI was concerned as to whether Amir shared this information with them during the interview afterwards. In an April 13, 1965 memo, Director Hoover says, New York should carefully review the information contained in reference letter as furnished by the late Leon Lionel Phillips. After this review, New York would determine whether Phillips had been interviewed by New York City Police Department during his visit there after the murder of Little. An attempt should be made to determine whether the information contained in reference letter is already in the possession of the New York Police Department, particularly the information alleged that the individual who fired the shotgun at Little was supposedly a lieutenant from the Newark Temple of the Nation of Islam. In the event this information is not already in the possession of NYPD, such information should not be furnished to the NYPD without first receiving Bureau authority. Since February 22nd, the FBI New York office, NYO, was instructed to not furnish information to the NYPD without clearance from Bureau headquarters, and the NYO was instructed to treat the assassination of Malcolm X as nothing more than a local murder case for the police themselves to solve, and the FBI should not be involved, i.e., should offer no assistance to the NYPD. The FBI's specific concern about keeping the identity of the shotgun shooter away from the New York police is remarkable. Hoover explicitly instructs the NYO, in the event this information is not already in possession of the redacted, such information should not be furnished to the NYPD without first receiving Bureau authority. Why is the FBI so alarmed over information concerning the identity of the shotgun killer from Newark getting out? Maybe the reason is this. The FBI had key sources within the Harlem Temple and in Newark and had advanced knowledge of the unfolding attempt on the life of Malcolm X. The FBI had placed a Newark NOI asset in the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. Equally significant, Paul Lee has identified several Bureau assets in number 25. As we will show below, the evidence is strong that the shotgun shooter was some kind of intelligence asset that infiltrated Newark's Temple number 25. I believe that it was to protect the identity of the assassin that the FBI killed Leon 4X Samir in his hotel on March 12, 1965. Shotgun assassin identified: William Bradley. A high school baseball star and later a Green Beret, Mr. William 25X Bradley was known as an enforcer on the Newark Mosque Muscle Team or Goon Squad. It is in fact no secret that the Green Berets have long been uniformed mercenaries of the CIA. It was noted that William Bradley may have been an informant. The CIA hid documents listing him as a suspect and did not share with the NYPD. The 1978 and 1979 affidavits of Thomas Hagen identified the assassin with the shotgun as Willie or Willie X. Hayer. Later described him as 27 years old in 1965, 5'10" or 5'11", tall, husky, dark, brown complexion, close-cropped hair, with a beard. He was a member of the Newark Mosque and a stick-up man. Attorney Kunstler later discovered that this was William 25X Bradley, who was currently serving a 7.5 to 15-year sentence for armed robbery at Caldwell State Prison. In April 1969, 3 masked men, one with a sawed-off shotgun, robbed Livingston National Bank in Livingston, New Jersey. A year later, William Bradley and James Henry Moore were charged with the robbery. While Moore was ultimately convicted of the crime, Bradley received a privileged treatment and the charges were dropped. but his privilege would run out and he ended up in prison, where attorney Kunstler tracked him down in 1978. He would eventually give his name. He would eventually change his name to Al Mustafa. He would eventually change his name to Al Mustafa Shabazz. Bradley first told Kunstler that he was not involved in the murder of Malcolm X, and then told a Muslim chaplain that he would not jeopardize himself by confessing involvement. On January 5, 1963, before his Nation of Islam days, Bradley was arrested for assault and battery, but the grand jury dismissed the case. The FBI produced an identification record for William Bradley. This may be an early case of Bradley receiving privileged treatment. Such incidents raised legitimate suspicions. As Manning Marable noted, Bradley's special treatment by the criminal justice system in 1969 and 1970 raises the question of whether he was an FBI informant, either after the assassination of Malcolm X or, very possible, even before. It would perhaps explain why Bradley took a different exit from the murder scene than the two other shooters, shielding him from the crowd's retaliation. It suggests that Bradley, possibly other Newark Mosque members, may have actively collaborated on the shooting with law enforcement and or the FBI. Abdul Rahman Muhammad likewise noted, but our research has convinced us that someone is protecting Bradley. When he questioned our sources about these strange things, their answers were very blunt. Bradley has been working for the feds. The evidence is strong that one of those acknowledged FBI assets in Temple 25 was William 25X Bradley. The New York Times reported Mr. Bradley was known to the FBI as early as 1963. There exists a revealing 15-page file on William 25X Bradley. District Attorney Cyrus Vance describes an FBI report dated September 28, 1965 contains a file on an individual named William 25X Bradley, which had been compiled between 1963 and 1965. The file was created by the Newark office of the FBI as a record of NOI members who had engaged in acts of violence. According to the file, Bradley was 27 years old at the time of the murder. According to government records, his height was 5 feet 8 inches or 5 feet 10 inches, and his weight recorded as 182 or 200 pounds. He was dark-skinned. He had been a lieutenant in a Newark Mosque and was known as a strongman there. He was a machine gunner in the Marine Corps. At the time, he had a criminal arrest for weapons possession, but the weapon was not specified. The FBI possessed photographs of Bradley. The FBI file on William Bradley had potential to call into question the identifications of defendants Thomas 15X Johnson and Norman 3X Butler. While Halim had yet to mention his name, Bradley's profile hit the description Amir had given of the shotgun shooter. Physically, he was a dark-skinned, husky, 27 years old, and often wore a beard. And his background matched the other particulars Amir provided. Bradley was a member of the Newark Mosque. He had been a lieutenant there and had military firearms training. While Amir was deceased by the time of the trial, information existed that could have led to his source of information. William Bradley entered the Marine Corps active duty on September 14, 1956. His occupation is machine gunner. Bradley had foreign service in Puerto Rico. While In the military, his character and efficiency ratings range from good to very good, and there was no record of court-martials or absence without leave. Bradley was such an upstanding Marine, he was awarded the Good Conduct Medal. Bradley was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps on September 11, 1959, and transferred to the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves. He was honorably discharged on September 13, 1962, but he left such a good impression with the military, he was recommended for re-enlistment. It appears that it was sometime after Bradley's 1959 discharge from the Marine Corps that he was invited to Fort Bragg's U.S. Army Special Forces School, where he received Green Beret training. Upon approval, members of other branches of the military can attend Special Forces Qualifications Courses, SFQ-C, at Fort Bragg. As we saw above, Al-Qaeda's Ali Muhammad received Green Beret training at Fort Bragg, though he never officially received the security clearance of an official Green Beret. Nevertheless, this unofficial status did not prevent Ali Muhammad from achieving the rank of E5 Sergeant and get posted at the highly secure JFK Special Warfare Center. Bradley seems to have enjoyed a similar unofficial but real status with the Green Berets. This special training was undoubtedly for him to carry out a particular assignment for the CIA. Remarkably, the next time we hear about William Bradley, he had become a notorious stick-up man and criminal, getting arrested for assault and battery and embarking on a life of crime less than a year after he left the military for good. How did such an upstanding Marine of good character take such a drastic turn? It appears that William Bradley might have been sheep-dipped into the CIA's secret army. If a soldier is assigned highly clandestine work, his records are changed to make it appear as if he resigned from the military or was given a civilian status. The process is called sheep dipping, after the practice of bathing sheep before they are sheared. William Hamilton explains it further. Farmers and ranchers dip sheep in a special solution to remove unwanted bugs from their wool. A sheep enters the dipping bath as an undipped sheep and emerges out the other side as sheep dipped, an animal transformed. In modern espionage terms, sheep dipping is where you take one of your agents and you give him or her an alternate identity. Through the sheep dipping process, you hope to rid your agent or case officer of all vestiges of his or her old self so that the agent or case officer can emerge with an entirely new persona. William Bradley, the upstanding Marine of very good character, was honorably discharged from the military and became a civilian animal transformed. He took on an alternative identity as a thug, and a new persona emerged. The whole point of sheep dipping was to allow a soldier to pose as a civilian and work as an intelligence operative during a covert mission. If Bradley was sheep dipped out of the Marine Corps, what might that covert mission have been? What operation would his new persona as a New Jersey thug serve? On December 24, 1963, an informant confirmed to the FBI Newark office that on December 13th, William Bradley was present as a registered member of Muhammad Mosque number 25 in Newark, now as William 25X. The FBI had their informants watch Bradley closely, noting the 107 temple functions he attended over 2 years. By April 1964, Bradley had become a lieutenant at 25. But in July 1964, it seems Lieutenant William 25X got in trouble and lost his post, and apparently was put out of the temple F-time. At a Wednesday, July 15, 1965 law night meeting, Newark Minister James 3X McGregor dismissed 20 FOI from the temple over a petition they signed against him. He gave them F-time. A report was then handed to Minister James outlining a punishable infraction by Lieutenant William 25X. He and another FOI engaged in a car chase with another FOI. When they were stopped by a toll booth, Lieutenant William 25X jumped out of his car, opened the door of the car his was chasing, and dragged the brother out of the vehicle while the brother was driving away. Minister James stopped reading the report, pointed out Lieutenant William 25X, and decreed that he was wrong in doing that. We recall that at the time of the assassination of Malcolm X, Talmadge Hayer was also dismissed from the temple because he likewise beat a fellow FOI, which was against the law of the Nation of Islam. William 25X lost his position as lieutenant and apparently put out. Leon Forex Amir was informed the man handling the shotgun shot from the hip appeared to be an expert in handling of this type of gun. Herman Ferguson, who witnessed the assassination, observed also, "I think the government was responsible, and certainly they had professional assassins as part of that team. One of the professionals that they used was the guy who fired that shotgun. He had to have been a professional. That was a professional shot. And I know something about weapons, and you would not have any old body trying to fire a shotgun. A shotgun is a very difficult weapon to fire with any degree of accuracy, and a sawed-off shotgun, you know? And this man just rested on his arm, like so, and fired from 15 feet into Malcolm. The first shot, and the only shot that he took on Malcolm, was fatal." Kondo says, "The puzzling fact about Bradley in his use of the shotgun during the murder, he handled it with one of the most difficult weapons to fire like a professional, firing it from the hip and emptying both barrels. I am hard-pressed to explain where a young brother in the mid-60s learned to master so difficult a weapon. This is no longer a mystery. William 25X Bradley had military firearms training as a military gunner in the Marine Corps and as a Green Beret. The presence of Green Berets in executive action operations, particularly Black Messiah murders, is notable. As early as 1963, the 902nd Military Intelligence Group planned the killing of black community leaders in volatile cities. Specialized Alpha Team units were covertly deployed in specialized civilian disguise in cities equipped with mugbooks of their targets. Black militants in the city to be taken out. Green Berets from 20th Special Forces Group, headquartered in Alabama, were detailed to spy on Dr. Martin Luther King in Memphis the day he was killed, and there was an 8-man Alpha team in place with backup snipers ready to take out Dr. Martin Luther King and Andrew Young if the civilian operation failed. As L. Fletcher Prouty tells us, the Green Berets have long been the uniformed mercenaries of the CIA. The most important member of the shooter team that gunned down Malcolm X, William X. Bradley, was reportedly a Green Beret. He was also likely a sheep-dipped intelligence operative not unlike Al-Qaeda's Ali Muhammad, who also received Green Beret training at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. Muhammad, an FBI and CIA asset, has been described as a Rosetta Stone for understanding the United States Al-Qaeda connection in the 9/11 attacks. It can similarly be said that Bradley, clearly an intelligence asset, was as well, is a Rosetta Stone for understanding the assassination of Malcolm X. Both Ali Muhammad and William Bradley seem to have followed the path, both having passed through the JFK Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Ali Muhammad and William Bradley both were associated with the Green Berets, received meritorious medals while in the military, were honorably discharged from the military, served in the reserves. Then they took up the cause of militant Islam and became dangerous fanatics. In Muhammad's case, it was the cause of Al-Qaeda, and in Bradley's case, the Nation of Islam. We know that Ali Muhammad was a double agent. William Bradley seems to have been a sheep-dipped intelligence asset as well. The revelations of Roland Shepard. I regularly attend Malcolm X's meetings in Harlem and was present at the meeting when Malcolm was assassinated. I witnessed Malcolm X's assassination at the ballroom on February 21st, 1965. I am writing with the benefit of first-hand knowledge of what took place that day. There is a strong corroboration that William 25X Bradley was an intelligence operative. Roland Shepard is one of the most important witnesses to the assassination of Malcolm X and the assassins. A left-wing activist with the Socialist Workers' Party between 1964 and 1965, Shepard was in charge of security when Malcolm X spoke at the Militant Labor Forum in New York City. He attended all but two of Malcolm X's Harlem lectures. On February 21st, he was outside of the Audubon Ballroom selling the Militant until Malcolm arrived. He then tells us, a while later, as I was walking into the meeting room, again, I did not see any cops. Gene Roberts, who we now know was an agent for the NYPD, walked up to me and offered to show me to my seat. I replied that I would just sit in my usual spot along with the rest of the press near the front of the room on the left. Roberts said, "No, you aren't sitting there today," so he steers me to a seat in the front row on the right side of the hall, meaning to Malcolm's left. A minute or two later, I stood up and looked over to the area where I normally sat to see if I could determine why I was not allowed to sit in my usual spot. Maybe the area was reserved for some VIPs or something. I did not see any press people, nor did I see any white people. What do I remember seeing was a rather large black man in a navy blue grayish topcoat. I had not seen him before. Roland normally sat with the other whites in the audience, particularly the press. On the front left row, Malcolm's right. This time, however, undercover bossy agent Gene Roberts stopped him from taking his normal seat and ushered him to the right front row, the third seat from the middle aisle. We now know that sitting in Roland's normal seat were the assassins, Talmadge Hayer, Leon Davis, and right behind them were Benjamin 3X and William 25X. When Roland looked over to the area of his former seat, He saw a rather large black man in a blue-grayish topcoat. This agrees with the witness description found in February 25, 1965 memo of the shotgun shooter as a Negro male. 6 feet 2 inches, 200 pounds, heavy build, dark complexion, wearing gray coat. Once the shooting started, Roland hit the floor, but he looked up to see what was happening. He saw Malcolm standing on the stage glaring down at one of his assassins. He then saw some men run out of the exit doors right of the stage. When I left the hall, Roland reports, Malcolm's bodyguard told me that they had caught two of the assassins. One who was Talmadge Hayer, and one whom the police took away. On March 23, 1965, Roland Shepard was interviewed at Manhattan North Borough Detective's office, where he made a mind-boggling discovery, he writes. A few days later, the New York Post wrote the irony of Malcolm being killed by blacks in an all-black audience. I responded to the article in writing, informing the people in charge of the paper and its readers that the audience was not all black, that there were some whites there, and I was one of them. A week or so later, I was contacted by the police and asked to come to the station to answer a few questions. I said I would and did so. When I was questioned in the Harlem police station, I was shown a series of photos of people who I recognized as members of the Nation of Islam or Malcolm's organization. I also saw a picture of the large black man with the navy blue grayish topcoat that I had seen at the Audubon Ballroom. I was thinking of how to respond to the cops and how to say that I did not recognize the photos of Malcolm's friends and supporters and the members of the Nation of Islam. I then told the cops that I had to go to the restroom. I did not really need to go to the restroom. I just used that as an excuse to buy time. I needed to think about what I wanted to tell the cops. As I walked towards the men's room, I saw the same burly black man coming out of the bathroom that I had seen in the Audubon Ballroom, and in the photos that had just been shown to me. He walked by me, past the desk of the secretarial pool, and went to an office inside the station. At that point, I knew that he and the government either killed Malcolm or were part of the assassination plot. I became very nervous thinking about what I was going to say to the cops when I came out of the restroom and how I was going to get out of the station alive. I then came up with, I cannot recognize anyone, for all black people look the same. The Irish cops nodded in agreement, and I was allowed to leave the police station. The burly dark-skinned man with the gray topcoat, the shooter, William 25X Bradley, was at the police station walking around like he had an office there, all while his picture was being displayed to Roland by an officer. It appears that most of the New York authorities seem to have been kept in the dark about William Bradley's Newark identity. FBI NYO informants were unaware of Bradley, and the NYPD Bossy records had no identifiable information on him. This strongly suggests that Bradley was either an intelligence operative on an official visit to the New York precinct, a very deep cover NYPD operative, maybe a Bossy agent. Later, Bossy agent Ray Wood would tell us something that seems to point to option 2. Undercover NYPD officer Ray Wood infiltrated several black organizations in the 1960s, including the Black Panther Party. He was one of 3 Bossy undercover agents who were in the Audubon Ballroom on that fateful day. He witnessed the assassination of Malcolm X and saw the primary assassin drop the shotgun on the ground after he committed his act. When he saw the shotgun shooter, Wood thought to himself, I've seen that motherfucker before. The fact that Bossy undercover agent Ray Wood recognized William Bradley is significant. According to Reggie Wood, to whom Ray Wood confided the first time Officer Ray saw the shotgun, shooter was in a New York police station. They both caught eyes. Recall what bossy detective Tony Buzza said of undercover officer Ray Wood. He never set foot in any police installation during the first months of his career as a policeman except as a person to be booked. It is highly likely that when undercover officer Wood saw that motherfucker, Bradley, at a New York police station, they were both doing undercover work and were being booked. As a matter of policy, these two operatives would not actually know how each other boss had a strict protocol to ensure its undercovers never knew one another for safety's sake, and to provide multiple sources of reporting, but somehow they recognized each other. Later, when Roland Shepard was interviewed at Manhattan North Borough Detective's office after the assassination, he saw William Bradley walking around that station as if he had an office there, all while being shown photos of murder suspects, one of which was a photo of William Bradley. Roland Shepard later confirmed that the man he saw in Harlem Police Station was William Bradley, Al Mustafa Shabazz. He wrote in 2015, on April 30th, 2010, I received an email from John Judge, the director of Coalition of Political Assassinations, referring to an April 22nd, 2010 article titled, For the First Time in History, The Face of William Bradley's Shotgun Assassin of Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El-Shabazz, in Public Safety Campaign Commercial for Mayor Booker. In that article is the picture shown of William Bradley, who was the man that I had seen in the Audubon Ballroom, and in the photos of the police station just shown to me while I had been interrogated by the Harlem police, and whom I saw coming out of the men's room walking by me past the desk of the secretarial pool, who then went to his office inside the police station. As I was going to the men's room, as I wrote in my original 2009 essay, at that point, I knew that he and the government either killed Malcolm X or part of the assassination plot. This makes Zach Condo's claim very wrong. It is reasonably possible that at least one of the assassins was an FBI asset. Yet my gut feeling is that none were simply because it was not necessary. It seems unlikely that any of the 5-man murder team were agents. The government did not need to use its own agents. And then of the course, we would also have to somehow connect the NYPD. And in fact, CIA and the fact all of the different groups we've named, we have to connect them directly with the men who fired the guns. And of course, if you want to get very, very clandestine about it, you could say, well, they were all agents and most of them were agents and one of them was an agent. I don't have any evidence of that. I think these were just hardcore members who believe in the Nation of Islam. They believe in organization of the Nation of Islam. They believe in the divinity of Elijah Muhammad. They basically did what they did out of their love for him. I've been able to identify more information about all 4 of them. I'm convinced that these were just hardcore Muslims, no less loyal than Captain Joseph, who died a few months ago, no less loyal than any other people who died and went to their grave talking about and praising Elijah Muhammad, and teed off that the nation split after Elijah Muhammad died. The evidence is strong that William X 25X Bradley pulled the trigger of the shotgun not as a zealous Muslim soldier for the Muslim mosque, but as a U.S. intelligence operative or law enforcement agent. Conclusion. All of this evidence makes Condo's recent claim quite baffling. I found no evidence of CIA involvement in Malcolm X's assassination. There's overwhelming evidence of CIA involvement in the assassination of Malcolm X in an urgent FBI teletype from the New York office of the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, dated February 22nd, 1965. It is reported that an informant overheard Life magazine reporter Mark Crawford in a conversation with a man from Washington, D.C., in which Crawford advised this man to check out Washington, D.C. and the CIA because they wanted Malcolm out of the way because he snafu'd African relations for the U.S. The same document also reported that Jack Shanahan of the Associated Press advised the New York FBI office on February 21st that one of their sources stated that Malcolm was not due to be assassinated until 2 weeks from today, but that the schedule was moved ahead. Important lessons from the document include: from Life magazine reporter Mark Crawford, we learned that the CIA wanted Malcolm X out of the way because he snafu'd African relations with the U.S. This testimony is significant. Time, Life, and thus Life magazine was one of these media assets of the CIA. As Vincent Salandria notes, Life magazine served our military intelligence community. Henry R. Luce, who created Life, was an ardent Cold Warrior, and both J. Edgar Hoover and his deputy Carla DeLoach had a close relationship with Life. The FBI allowed to plant completely false stories in the magazine. Luce served the CIA as well. For many years, his personal emissary to the CIA was C.D. Jackson, and a Time Inc. vice president, who was publisher of Time magazine from 1960 until his death in 1964. As John Venkin and John Whalen report, Time and Life magazine founder Henry Luce was a close chum of CIA Director Allen Dulles,